A Werewolf Shifter Romance by Cauliflower Campbell. Prologue. The Forgotten Years. The forest swallowed her footsteps. The pines pressed close, towering like silent sentinels, as if they too were holding their breath. Snow clung stubbornly to their branches, dropping in sudden clumps whenever the wind shifted. The underbrush, thick and frost-slick, dragged at her skirts as though the earth itself was conspiring to slow her down. Ella ran anyway. Her lungs burned, each ragged gasp slicing her throat with the bitter edge of winter. The night air stung her eyes until tears blurred her vision, but she did not stop. She could not. Her dress, once sky blue, stitched with careful hands and made for gentler days, was now nothing but tattered ribbons clinging damply to her legs. Branches clawed at her arms, scratching red welts across her pale skin. Behind her, the forest howled, not with the wind alone, but with something else, something unseen, something hunting her. Her belly jutted forward, swollen and heavy, as though mocking the terror that drove her onward. She clutched it with one arm, protectively, desperately, whispering between gasps, "Hold on. Please. Hold on." Every step sent a jolt of pain through her hips and spine. Her body screamed for rest, her muscles threatening to buckle beneath her. But her fear screamed louder. She didn't dare look back, didn't dare risk seeing what shadows trailed her through the trees. And then, the forest thinned. The trees broke suddenly into a clearing, and beyond it, faint smoke curling from chimneys. A cluster of rooftops huddled together against the winter sky. Lights burned in windows. The faint chatter of human voices drifted on the wind. A village. Relief collided with dread. Her steps faltered as her boots skidded through the mud, sending up clumps of earth. She stumbled to a halt at the clearing's edge, chest heaving, hair plastered damp against her face. Her whole body shook, her breath tearing in and out like broken glass. And then she felt it, eyes. The villagers noticed her at once. A woman froze by the well, her hands tightening on the rope that creaked against the pulley. Men carrying baskets of firewood stopped mid-step, shifting uneasily under the weight. A pair of children chasing each other through the snow skidded to a halt, their laughter dying instantly. Dozens of eyes fastened on Ella. She stared back, wild-eyed, her chest rising and falling so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Their faces blurred together in her vision. Strange, unfamiliar, and yet there was something in the lines of the houses, the stonework of the well, the smell of smoke and baked bread wafting through the air. She didn't recognize any of them. She didn't even recognize herself. Her trembling fingers pulled at the torn fabric of her dress, trying and failing to cover the swollen curve of her stomach. The murmurs started like the first stirrings of wind before a storm. It can't be her face. That's Ella. The name struck her like an echo from a place she couldn't reach. Ella. It sounded strange, foreign, even though it was hers. She blinked, her head shaking faintly as confusion twisted her insides. Then a voice broke through. "Ella?" The crowd parted slightly as a kind-faced woman pushed forward, her apron dusted with flour, her eyes wide with disbelief. She reached out, steadying Ella's trembling arm before she could collapse. "My God, it is you," the woman whispered, tears brimming in her lashes. Her voice trembled, thick with shock. "Child, where have you been? We thought you were gone forever." Ella's lips parted, her throat dry, the pounding of her heart so violent it hurt. I don't know," she rasped, her voice raw with terror. The woman didn't release her. Instead, she guided her gently toward a modest house at the edge of the clearing. Villagers whispered behind them, footsteps shuffling as more people followed at a distance. Inside, warmth engulfed her. The glow of a hearth flickered against the walls, carrying the faint scent of smoke and herbs. Ella shivered, the heat doing little to chase away the chill buried deep in her bones. The woman pressed a wooden cup into her hands, water sloshing slightly with her trembling. She drank in desperate gulps, the liquid spilling down her chin, soaking into the torn fabric of her dress. When she lowered the cup, the woman's gaze drifted downward to her belly. "Sweet child," the woman breathed, her voice soft but laced with the weight of unspoken questions. "What happened to you? Where's your aunt? And why is your dress torn like this?" Ella stiffened, her arms folded over her belly as though the woman's gaze could cut through flesh and bone. Her lips trembled, but no words came. The woman's eyes darkened, but she pressed no further. Instead, she stood quietly and said, "Come, your aunt must see you." Word traveled swiftly, like fire catching dry leaves. By the time they reached the central house of the village, Ella's aunt was already standing in the doorway. Her husband loomed quietly beside her. The firelight behind them painted the room in shades of gold and shadow. Her aunt's expression was cold, not relief, not shock, but anger. Ella froze at the threshold. The house was familiar in ways that made her chest ache. The rug by the hearth, worn thin in the center, the beams overhead, etched with the scratches of time, the faint smell of boiled herbs lingering in the air. She knew this place. She belonged here, and yet it felt alien, like stepping into a memory that wasn't hers. Her aunt stepped aside wordlessly. Ella entered, her fingers brushing the wooden doorframe as though the touch might spark something in her blank mind. The door shut behind her with a heavy thud, and the lock slid into place. The murmurs of the villagers outside were cut off instantly. Silence thickened. "Sit," her aunt commanded, her voice like stone. Ella lowered herself onto the bench by the hearth, her swollen belly pressing against her thighs. Her aunt's husband sat across from her, his face unreadable, though his eyes flickered with something softer than his wife's. Her aunt folded her arms tightly. "Where have you been for the last 3 years, Ella?" Ella's lips parted. Her tongue felt heavy, her thoughts tangled in darkness. I don't know." Her aunt's gaze narrowed into slits. Suspicion burned there. "And your condition?" She gestured sharply at Ella's stomach. "Who put this child inside you?" Ella's hands clamped over her belly protectively. Her head shook violently, desperately. "I don't know!" The words cracked, breaking into something that sounded like a sob. "I swear I don't remember!" Her aunt's lips pressed into a hard line. Fury flashed across her face. Without another word, she spun and stormed toward the kitchen. Her husband rose quietly to follow, but before he did, he glanced back at Ella. His gaze lingered, not unkind but heavy with pity. Days blurred into a haze. Ella stayed beneath their roof, though no welcome warmed the walls. She scrubbed pots, swept the floor, fetched water, her swollen belly making each task harder. She walked through the village streets carefully, never lingering, never speaking. But the whispers followed her everywhere. She came back from the dead. She's carrying a cursed child. She's not the same as she once was. Every glance was sharp, suspicious. Every shadow felt hostile. Until one afternoon, when everything shattered. The market bustled with life, the clatter of wooden carts, the shouts of vendors hawking wares. Ella clutched her shawl tightly around her shoulders, pulling it close against the biting wind. She tried to move unnoticed, to blend into the shifting crowd. A boy darted past her suddenly, his laughter bright, chasing after a wooden ball that bounced across the snow. He crashed into her side with a sharp jolt. Ella stumbled, catching herself with a hand against the wall of a shop. The boy, however, crumpled. His small body convulsed violently on the frozen ground, his limbs jerking. Screams split the air. "Help! The boy! What's happening to him?" Villagers rushed to his side, but in the same breath their eyes snapped toward Ella. She touched him. "No, she cursed him! She's a witch!" Ella staggered back, horror ripping through her. "No, I didn't do anything!" But the air around her shivered. Her belly tightened painfully, and from deep within something stirred. Her wolf. A low growl tore from her lips, unbidden, inhuman. The villagers gasped in unison, recoiling. By the time the boy's chest stilled and his body went slack, their verdict was written in their eyes. She killed him, she bewitched him, she's dangerous. Spit struck the ground near her boots as she fled, the word witch hissing after her like a curse. When she returned to her aunt's house, the air inside was thick with judgment. Her aunt's husband stood grim and silent, while her aunt's fury burned hotter than the hearth. "Tell me now," her aunt demanded, voice sharp as steel. "Who is the father of that child you carry?" Ella's voice trembled, her eyes shining with tears. "I don't know. Don't lie to me." Her aunt slammed her palm on the table, the crack echoing through the room. "You vanish for years, you return like this, and you dare bring shame into my house?" "Aunt, please," Ella whispered, tears spilling freely. "I truly don't know. Please believe me." But her aunt's face was set, stone and iron. "You leave tonight." The chill of night cut like knives as Ella stepped onto the road, nothing but her shawl wrapped around her and a satchel with stale bread pressed to her side. Her breath puffed white in the dark, her body trembling with cold despair and fear. Behind her, footsteps followed. Her aunt's husband emerged from the shadows, his face grave. He pressed coins into her hands, the metal biting cold against her skin. "Use this," he said quietly. "Even though it's not much, find a way to protect yourself." "And that child." Her throat closed. She whispered, "Thank you, Uncle." He nodded once, heavy with regret, then turned back to the house. And she was alone. The road stretched on endlessly, carrying her toward the distant glow of Lichen Ridge. She slept where she could, on cots in church basements, curled in corners of crowded shelters, her arms always wrapped around her belly. Some strangers pitied her, offering crusts of bread or scraps of warmth, but pity could not fill the gnawing hollow inside. One morning she stumbled through the marketplace, her shawl pulled tightly, her body weak. Her eyes caught on a scrap of paper plastered to a cracked wall. A flyer. She froze. The words leapt out like a voice from fate itself. The Alpha of Ironfang seeks unborn children for adoption. Mothers willing to give their babies a chance at a wealthy future will be compensated. Her hand trembled as she traced the words. Her knees bent, her body crouching low as though protecting her unborn child from the world's harsh gaze. Tears blurred her vision. "This child," she whispered. "I have to protect this child." The world had turned against her, the village had rejected her family had cast her out. But if the Ironfangs wanted what others despised, then maybe, just maybe, this was her only chance to save her baby. Chapter 1. The Curse of Fate. The dream came again. Adrian Ironfang jolted awake, his chest heaving, lungs dragging in air as though he had surfaced from drowning. Sweat clung to his skin despite the winter chill seeping through the stone walls. The taste of smoke and sorrow still lingered at the back of his throat, bitter, unshakable. For a long moment, he simply sat in the darkness, his large hands dragging down his face, palms trembling as if he could physically scrub the nightmare from his skull. But the images never left. They clung to him, haunting and vivid, like scars etched far too deep to ever fade. The boy was always the same. Curly-haired, laughter ringing out like bells, eyes bright as sunlight. Racing across a meadow, his small legs pumping furiously as though he could outrun the world. His son, at least that was what Adrian felt. The laughter filled his chest with a warmth he had never known before, a happiness so fierce it made his wolf pace with contentment beneath his skin. But then the shadow came. Always the same, thick suffocating blackness swallowing the field whole. It consumed the boy in one breath, smothering his laughter into screams that curdled Adrian's blood. And then the words, broken, terrified, echoing from that darkness. "It's too late, Dad." That was when he always woke. Adrian exhaled shakily, rubbing the back of his neck. His wolf prowled restlessly inside, claws scraping against the walls of his control, unsettled by the dream. But Adrian had no son. He had never had one. Could never have one. That was the curse. The curse that clung to him like a brand the pack never dared speak to his face but whispered behind his back. The curse of the childless Alpha. He could not sire heirs. Could not continue the Ironfang bloodline. He was Alpha in name and power, but a failure where it mattered most. The shame of it weighed heavier than the crown of leadership he bore. Adrian swung his legs off the side of the bed, the floor cold beneath his bare feet. He sat in silence, staring at the faint threads of dawn creeping between the tall curtains. The Ironfang estate stretched around him, an empire of stone and glass, of polished wood and silver. Lavish, powerful, cold. Every hall echoed with silence where laughter should have lived. His gaze slid to the dresser. A photograph in a gilded frame caught the morning light. Vanessa Ironfang. Even in stillness, her beauty was lethal. Auburn curls spilled down her shoulders like fire. Her skin, pale as porcelain, seemed untouched by time or care. Her lips, full, dangerous, were painted the soft red of seduction. And her eyes, sharp and green, could cut through armor if she wished. She'd been chosen for him by his father, Richard Ironfang, the former Alpha. Richard always claimed beauty and ambition made a woman strong enough to stand beside the Ironfang heir. Adrian clenched his jaw. He had tried more times than he could count. Endless nights, endless hope, endless failure. Vanessa's womb remained as silent as the halls of their home. There were no children, only whispers, only empty rooms, only silence. Adrian rose, pacing the length of the chamber, dragging a hand through his dark hair. Frustration pressed against his ribs like iron. His father's voice still echoed in his memory. You are Alpha. You are not desperate. To beg for another man's child is weakness, shame. But Adrian's instinct screamed otherwise. The dream haunted him too often, too vividly. That boy, his boy, felt real, flesh and blood. As though somewhere in this world, fate had already woven his child into existence, and he would not be denied. That was why he had sent out the flyers. Across Lichen Ridge and far beyond, word spread like wildfire. The Alpha of Ironfang seeks unborn heirs. The city whispered. Some mocked him, some feared him, but they came all the same. Women with swollen bellies, women with desperation in their eyes, women clutching hope in trembling hands. Vanessa had supported him, or at least she pretended to. She stroked his jaw one evening, her smile painted sweet. It's a good choice, Adrian, she had purred. If you can't give the pack a child, then take one. It will silence the whispers, and perhaps... Her green eyes gleamed with something sharp. Perhaps it will fulfill your dreams. But he had not missed the glint in her gaze, that thin line between ambition and malice. Vanessa supported anything that carved her path closer to power. Now, inside the towering Ironfang estate, the women gathered. The grand lobby shimmered beneath golden chandeliers, light scattering across polished marble floors. The Ironfang crest, a wolf etched in silver, snarling, was carved proudly into the walls, a silent reminder of the pack's dominance. Guards lined the entrances in tailored suits, their eyes hard, hands clasped at their backs. Their mere presence made shoulders stiffen. On the benches, pregnant women waited. Some whispered nervously to one another. Others sat in silence, hands stroking the swell of their stomachs as though soothing unseen fears. They came from every corner of the land, some with threadbare shawls, others draped in gowns too fine for the streets they claimed to hail from. Every one of them had come for one reason, one chance. A glance from the Alpha. A nurse in white led them one by one through quiet doors, blood tests, health examinations, background checks. Ella sat quietly among them, her hands folded protectively over her swollen belly, her torn blue dress, mended clumsily, stood out among silks and lace. She pulled her shawl tighter, her head lowered, eyes fixed on the floor. She did not belong here, and she knew it. Still, she had passed her tests. The doctor had nodded at her strength, at the steady heartbeat of her child. She had been allowed into the line. Now she stood with the others, waiting for her turn, waiting for judgment. The heavy double doors opened, and the air shifted. Vanessa entered first. Every head turned. She was breathtaking, every detail deliberate. Her emerald silk gown clung to her curves, the fabric shimmering like liquid jewels beneath the light. Her auburn curls spilled over her shoulders in soft, flawless waves. Even her perfume, sharp, intoxicating, seemed crafted to make hearts falter. She walked with slow, deliberate grace, each step echoing through the lobby like a pronouncement. And she smiled faintly, not kindness, not welcome, but triumph. To these women she was rival, she was judge, she was executioner. Then came Adrian, the Alpha of Ironfang. His presence stole the air from the room, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a fitted black suit that looked cut from the shadows themselves. His jaw was sharp, his dark hair slicked back, his gray eyes glinting like steel. He moved with a predator's stillness, his control so absolute that even silence bent beneath it. The guards straightened instantly. The women lowered their eyes. Ella's hands trembled where they gripped her shawl. Her heart thundered against her ribs, her breath shallow. She did not know why she shook so fiercely, only that his presence made her feel as though the world itself had narrowed to this single moment. Adrian and Vanessa disappeared behind the office doors. The women were called one by one. Some left pale and trembling, rejection carved into their faces. Others fled in tears, clutching their bellies as though shielding their children from unseen blades. A rare few emerged with faint smiles, though their relief looked fragile. Ella's turn drew closer. Her knees threatened to buckle. She pressed her palm against her belly, whispering softly as she always did when fear tried to crush her. "It's okay," she murmured. "I'll protect you. Whatever happens, I'll keep you safe. Finally." Her name. Ella stepped inside. The office loomed vast and imposing. Dark mahogany shelves towered around her, stacked with books and ledgers. A massive desk carved from black wood stood at its center, the Ironfang crest etched into its surface. Behind it, tall windows framed the city below, Lichen Ridge sprawling like a kingdom at Adrian's feet. The air smelled of leather and power. Adrian sat behind the desk, his attention fixed on a file in his hands. But when his eyes lifted, when they locked onto her, the world stopped. He didn't move, didn't blink. His gaze trailed over her mended blue dress, her trembling hands clutching the shawl, the gentle swell of her belly beneath fragile fabric. Something unreadable flickered in his eyes, a sharpness that felt almost like recognition. Vanessa stood at his side, her hand resting lightly on the desk, her lips curved in a faint smirk, eyes glinting with judgment. Adrian spoke at last, his voice low, steady, carved from command. Name. Her throat was dry. Ella. Age. 22. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Vanessa tilted her head, her gaze slicing over Ella like a blade. "She's plain," she murmured, her voice honeyed but cruel. "Pretty, in a fragile way. But can she truly bear the weight of Ironfang?" Ella flinched, her arms tightening around her belly. Adrian's gray eyes flicked briefly to Vanessa, then returned to Ella. He said nothing, but his stare was unrelenting, as though he could peel back her skin, see the marrow beneath, and uncover truths she didn't even know herself. And in that silence, something shifted. The dream stirred inside him, the boy, the meadow, the shadow. But this time, different. A torn blue dress, a shawl, a pair of wide, frightened eyes staring back at him. Adrian's jaw tightened, his spine straightened. "This one," he said. Vanessa blinked, her composure cracking. "Already? You haven't even—" "I said this one." His tone cut like a blade. Final. Absolute. The room froze. Ella's breath caught, her heart hammering wildly. In one sentence, in one unshakable command, her life had changed forever. Chapter 2. Taken to Ironfang Estate. The contract sat on the desk like a guillotine. Its pages gleamed white against the polished mahogany, neat words stacked in perfect legal precision, every line dripping with the coldness of ownership. The Ironfang crest was stamped into the parchment in black wax, sharp edges catching the light as though mocking her hesitation. Ella's fingers trembled as she stared at it. She had never seen anything like this. Paper so fine, lettering so sharp, words that seemed to breathe power. It wasn't just a contract. It was a declaration that her life was no longer her own. Beta Matt stood beside her, tall and broad, his presence steady but unreadable. His uniform was crisp, his posture iron straight, his sharp features carved into discipline. He had laid the papers out for her carefully, his deep voice explaining clause after clause with a soldier's precision. His tone carried no malice, but neither did it soften. "You understand, Ella," Matt said evenly, pointing to the line again, his finger tracing the ink that looked darker than the rest, "that once you sign this, you are property of the Alpha. From today forward, you and your unborn child are Ironfang. This house becomes your cage, your protection and your sentence, until the child is born, and beyond." Her lips parted, but no sound came. The words rattled inside her skull like stones. Property, cage, sentence. Matt hesitated just a moment, then tapped the clause that seemed to cut deepest. His voice lowered slightly, though the weight of it still struck her like a blow. "This here, if there is danger during childbirth and only one can be saved." His jaw tightened. For the first time, his eyes flickered, almost like he didn't want to be the one saying it. "The heir will be saved. You will not." Ella's throat closed, a lump rising so sharp it hurt. Her fingers clenched her shawl tighter, pulling it around her shoulders as though it could shield her. The fabric was frayed, thin as paper, but it was all she had left of herself. She thought of the villagers, their whispers, their pointing fingers, the spittle that had landed at her feet when they hissed witch. She thought of the boy convulsing on the ground, his mother screaming in her ear until the sound blurred with her own sobs. She thought of her aunt's face twisted in rage, telling her to get out, her voice as cold as stone, and the hollow slam of the door that had ended her place in that home forever. And then she thought of her baby, the tiny heartbeat that had kept her alive when the world insisted she was nothing. The warmth that fluttered beneath her ribs, reminding her that she wasn't alone. The one anchor tethering her to hope. Her eyes burned, but she forced herself to look at the paper again. The words were cruel, yes, but buried beneath the cruelty she saw something else. Security, a roof, a name, a future. Her baby's life secured under the protection of one of the most feared alphas in Lichen Ridge. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "So, this contract, it's not mine anymore. My baby isn't mine." Matt didn't flinch. He had the expression of a man used to carrying out orders without question. And yet, his eyes softened just barely, like a stone cracked by time. "The child belongs to Ironfang," he said. "But," his voice dropped quieter, almost human now, "the contract favors the heir, which means, yes, you'll be under chains, Ella, but the child will live with everything you cannot give." Her chest twisted like a blade turned inside her. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint tick of the clock and the soft hum of power vibrating through the Alpha's office walls. And then Ella reached for the pen. Her hand shook as she pressed it to the paper, scrawling her name in letters that looked too small, too fragile against the bold ink of the contract. When it was done, she laid the pen down gently, her chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. Matt gathered the papers with careful hands, his expression unreadable once more. He turned toward the desk. It is done. Behind the desk, Alpha Adrian leaned back in his chair, steel gray eyes watching her. He had been silent the entire time, unreadable as stone. But now his lips parted, his voice low and commanding. Escort her to the estate. Double security. She is Ironfang now, and the pack will not forgive this easily. Ella's head jerked up at him, startled by the weight of his gaze. There was no kindness there, no pity, just cold, brutal certainty. Yet, something in his eyes lingered a moment too long on her face, a flicker, a recognition he did not name. Yes, Alpha, Matt said, bowing slightly before turning to her. Come, we leave at once. As she rose, movement stirred at the edge of the office. Vanessa stepped forward. She had been silent until now, watching with sharp, calculating eyes from the shadows. Her gown shimmered in emerald silk as she moved, her auburn curls spilling like a crown over her shoulders. Every step was deliberate, as though she owned the ground itself. Her smile was thin, brittle as glass. So this is her, she said softly, her words dripping venom, the chosen vessel of Ironfang. Ella froze under that gaze. She had known disdain before, but this was different. Vanessa's beauty was suffocating, her confidence weaponized. The way her eyes swept over Ella's ragged blue dress, the torn edges stitched by her own hand, it was as if Vanessa saw not a woman but a blemish. Still, Ella refused to bow her head. She gripped her shawl tighter, her spine stiffening with quiet defiance. Vanessa's lips curved faintly, but her emerald eyes narrowed. Pretty, she murmured to Adrian, though her voice carried across the room. Too pretty for her own good. Heat flared in Ella's cheeks, but she stood still. Adrian did not respond. His eyes were already on Matt. Take her. The heavy doors opened, and the world outside the office was already waiting. Whispers greeted them the moment Ella stepped into the hall. Dozens of eyes turned, cutting through her like blades. She's the one, a voice hissed. That's her. The Alpha chose her. No, it can't be. The child isn't even his. Ironfang has gone mad. Disbelief, envy, rage. Ella lowered her gaze and pressed closer to Matt as the guards closed around her in a protective wall. Still, she could feel the stares stabbing into her skin. She could hear the mutters that followed like daggers, slicing into her every step. By the time they reached the grand doors of the tower, the whispers had traveled beyond the walls. Lichen Ridge itself was buzzing with the news, and in the Ironfang family's inner circle, the uproar had already begun. Richard Ironfang, the former Alpha, slammed his fist against his desk when the words reached him. Papers scattered across the floor. And a body? His roar shook the room. Adrian chooses a village stray over an Alpha's daughter? Over women of standing? His fury turned on his son when they finally met later that day, his silver beard bristling as his eyes burned with outrage. I gave you Vanessa, Richard spat. A woman of beauty, influence, class. If you must adopt, then adopt from power. There are rich Alphys' daughters cast out in shame, their bellies full. You could turn scandal into strength. But this girl, this ragged little nothing? She weakens us. Adrian's face remained impassive. His father's rage rolled off him like water on steel. I do what I want, he said simply, and walked away. No one dissuaded Adrian Ironfang. And so, under heavy guard, Ella was led out to the waiting SUV. The car gleamed under the Lichen Ridge sun, its black paint polished to a mirror shine. Inside, the leather smelled of cedar and smoke, the cushions too soft for her tense body to relax. 2 sleek vehicles followed behind, filled with guards, an entire convoy marking her like a prize, or a target. Ella sat stiffly in the back, her shawl pulled close, her eyes darting from window to window. Matt sat across from her, arms folded, his face unreadable, though his sharp eyes scanned the streets as if expecting an ambush. The drive through Lichen Ridge was dizzying. She had never seen a city like this. Streets lined with shops glittering with glass displays, restaurants alive with music and laughter, cars that purred like sleek beasts. Billboards towered overhead, flashing names and faces she didn't know, words she couldn't quite catch. Ella pressed her forehead lightly to the glass, her breath fogging the window. This world was nothing like the outskirts of Stormbane, where houses were wood and stone, and hunger stalked every doorstep. Here, everything pulsed with wealth. But for every glittering light, she saw shadows. People stopped in their tracks to stare at the convoy. Fingers pointed, mouths whispered. That must be her, the Alpha's choice. Her stomach twisted, she pulled her shawl tighter, whispering to the life inside her, "We'll be okay, I'll make sure you're okay." The SUV slowed as it rolled past towering iron gates. Wolves carved into the metal snarled silently at her, their eyes gleaming in the sunlight. Beyond them, the Ironfang estate spread across acres like a kingdom of its own. Ella gasped. The mansion loomed like something out of legend, stone walls stretching into the sky, windows glinting like watchful eyes, balconies lined with marble columns. Gardens sprawled around it, fountains spraying crystal arcs into the air, statues of wolves standing guard among roses and hedges carved into flawless symmetry. Luxury hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The SUV pulled to a stop, maids carrying linens froze in their tracks. Gardeners straightened, their shears dangling. Guards snapped to attention. All eyes turned to her. Ella stepped out slowly, clutching her shawl, the torn edges of her blue dress glaring against the marble steps, the weight of their stares pressed on her skin, prickling heat rising in her cheeks. Who is she? Why her? What is she doing here? Matt's hand rested firm against her back as he guided her up the steps. "All this way," he said quietly, his voice softer now. "You'll settle into your quarters. And, Ella?" She looked up at him, startled by the way her name sounded from his lips. "Keep your head high. They'll try to tear you apart. Don't let them see you break." Her throat tightened, but she nodded. She forced her spine straight, her steps steady, though her legs trembled with every movement. And as she stepped into the mansion that would now be her prison, and her child's fortress, Ella knew one truth. The Ironfang estate had claimed her, and nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Chapter 3. Ironfang Opposition. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Ella's new quarters, casting golden streaks across the polished wooden floor. The warmth of dawn kissed her cheek, a cruelly gentle reminder that no matter how much she wished it, the world had not stopped turning for her. The bed she lay in was unlike anything she had ever slept on before, soft, impossibly vast, draped in ivory sheets that smelled faintly of lavender. Every detail screamed wealth and control. The four-poster canopy arched high above her like a prison disguised as luxury. For a fleeting moment, her mind tricked her into believing she was safe, that perhaps she was still back in the outskirt villages of Stormbane, waking in her aunt's modest home, the air filled with the familiar scent of her aunt's bread baking. But her eyes betrayed her. The chandelier of cut glass above her head glittered coldly. The ornate dresser against the far wall bore the crest of Ironfang carved deep into its wood, as though the symbol itself was watching her. And by the door stood two staff members in silence, their gazes downward but their presence a reminder. She was not free. Her chest tightened. She was no longer Ella of Stormbane. She was Ella, bound by ink and signature, property of Ironfang. Her fingers drifted unconsciously to her stomach, a small protective gesture. Inside her, life stirred, fragile but fierce. It was the only reason she had agreed, the only reason she had put herself in Adrian Ironfang's path. The child was her future, her only hope, and now, by cruel twist of fate, her link to this place, to him, to power that was both shield and shackle. The door creaked open. Ella sat up instantly, the fine sheets pooling at her waist. Matt, the beta, entered first. His presence was steady, his shoulders squared, his expression calm in that quietly commanding way that made him instantly distinct from the other men who scurried about the estate. His eyes softened when they landed on her, as though he understood her fear without her needing to say a word. But behind him came another figure. Vanessa. Her presence filled the room like a sudden draft of cold wind. She moved with elegance, her silk blouse clinging perfectly to her tall frame, her auburn hair swept into a knot that showed off the hard lines of her cheekbones. Her lips were pressed into a tight smile that never reached her calculating eyes. Ella knew that look well. It was the look of someone who had been born into privilege, who had perfected disdain into an art. "Good," Vanessa said, her voice low and cutting as her gaze roamed the chamber with deliberate slowness. She inspected every detail, the sheets, the dresser, the guarded door, before fixing her stare on Ella. "You're awake. I was beginning to wonder if you intended to waste the morning." Matt's eyes flicked to Vanessa, a subtle warning, but she ignored him. Ella did not flinch. Her posture remained composed even as her pulse throbbed in her throat. "It seems I don't have much choice about mornings anymore," she replied softly, her tone calm but laced with quiet steel. Vanessa's brows lifted, amusement flickering in her eyes. She stepped closer, circling the bed with the precision of a predator. Her perfume trailed in the air, sharp and expensive. "You'll learn," she murmured, voice velvet hiding venom. "This estate isn't Stormbane. You don't wander or speak as you please here. You're here because Adrian allows it. Remember your place." The words stung, but Ella refused to let Vanessa see weakness. Matt cleared his throat, stepping forward before the exchange could sharpen further. His tone was steady, commanding but not unkind. "Ella, you are to eat well and take care of yourself. Meals will be delivered directly to your quarters. The staff will attend to your needs. Everything is for the health of the baby." The contrast between Vanessa's hostility and Matt's protective firmness struck Ella like night against day. Gratitude flickered in her eyes as she met his gaze briefly. Then she turned back to Vanessa, refusing to look away. "I'll take care of myself," she said, her voice steady, deliberate. "Not because you ordered me to, but because my child deserves it." The words landed with precision. Vanessa's jaw tightened, her perfect mask of composure cracking for the briefest of seconds before she smoothed it back into indifference. "See that you do," she said sharply. "Adrian doesn't tolerate weakness." With a swish of silk and a trail of bitter perfume, she swept from the room, her heels clicking against the floor like final notes of a threat. Matt lingered. His expression softened, though his jaw still held tension from biting back words at Vanessa. "Don't let her get to you," he said quietly, his voice dipping lower so the guards by the door couldn't hear. "This place can be cruel, but not everyone here wishes you harm." Something unspoken passed between them. For the first time since that cursed contract had bound her, Ella felt a flicker of comfort. Later that day, Matt escorted her through the estate. The Ironfang mansion pulsed with activity. Guards patrolled the stone corridors with precise discipline. Servants in crisp uniforms hurried by carrying trays of silver and porcelain. From a distant courtyard drifted the echo of swords clashing, grunts of men in training. Everywhere Ella walked, eyes followed. Some widened in shock at the sight of her. Others narrowed in disdain, lips curling as whispered words hissed through the halls like snakes. "She's the one. The Stormbane girl, carrying a child that isn't his. Disgraceful." But Ella refused to lower her head. Her spine remained straight, her chin lifted high. If they wished to call her disgrace, then she would force them to look upon her dignity while they whispered. Finally, they reached the Alpha's home office. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the scent of cigar smoke rolled out. Inside, shelves climbed the walls, stuffed with books, maps, and ledgers. The air carried the musk of leather and old power. Behind a massive desk sat Adrian Ironfang, his storm gray eyes focused on the papers before him, quills scratching across parchment. He did not look up at once. Ella hesitated on the threshold until Matt gently nudged her forward. At last, Adrian raised his head. His eyes landed on her, sharp as blades, but something shifted in them. The hardness eased. For a fleeting moment, a ghost of a smile tugged at his lips. "Ella," he said, his voice smooth yet quieter than she expected. "Come closer." Her feet carried her forward with measured caution. Adrian rose from his chair, moving with a predatory grace that reminded her he was alpha not merely in title but in nature, yet his eyes searched hers with unsettling intensity, as though she was more puzzle than prisoner. "Are you finding everything comfortable enough?" he asked, his voice softened in a way that startled her. Ella blinked. Of all the questions she expected, that was not one. "It's different," she admitted carefully, "but I'll manage." Something unreadable flickered across his expression. He seemed about to say more. But the moment shattered. The doors opened again and Vanessa entered, her heels a sharp intrusion. Instantly, the warmth drained from the room. Adrian's jaw tightened, his shoulders stiffened. The brief gentleness that had softened his gaze toward Ella vanished like smoke. "Adrian," Vanessa said smoothly, her voice drenched in authority. She did not spare Ella a glance. "Your father awaits you in the council hall. There is the matter of appearances we must discuss." Adrian's expression hardened to cold stone. He turned to Ella, his voice clipped, almost cruel. "You may go." Confusion pricked her chest like needles. The sudden change stung, but she said nothing. With quiet dignity, she turned and left, her thoughts swirling in a storm of unanswered questions. What Ella did not hear was the storm erupting inside the Alpha's family halls. Richard Ironfang, Adrian's father, had gathered his allies among the elders. The council chamber vibrated with his fury. "She's nothing!" Richard thundered, fists slamming against the polished table. "A girl from the outskirts, tainted by scandal, carrying a child that isn't his by blood. And Adrian, my son, chooses her over every noble daughter he could have taken. This is madness." Beside him, Margaret, Adrian's mother, sat stiffly, her fingers twisted in her lap. Worry carved lines into her face. She had been swayed by Richard's sharp words, and when Adrian entered at last, her voice trembled. "Adrian, listen to reason," she pleaded. "There are other women, daughters of Alphas, women with standing, with wealth. Why her? Why a nobody? Think of the Pact's image. Think of your future." The chamber hushed. All eyes turned to Adrian. He stood tall, hands clasped behind his back, his posture radiating Alpha command. His storm-gray gaze swept the room, daring anyone to challenge him. "You think I care for image?" he asked coldly, each word like a knife. "You think I bend to your politics?" His eyes locked on his father's. "I don't care if she's from the outskirts. I don't care if the child isn't of my blood. She stays. She is under my protection, and anyone who tries to touch her will answer to me." The finality in his tone sent chills down spines. No elder spoke again, none dared, but as his voice faded into silence, Margaret whispered, barely audible, "Why her, Adrian? Why are you drawn to her?" Adrian said nothing. He didn't trust his voice not to betray him. Yet inside his chest, a truth burned with silent fire. He was drawn to Ella, inescapably, inexplicably, and he would never let anyone take her away. Chapter 4. Learning to Care. The Ironfang estate carried a kind of silence that was never truly quiet. The massive halls echoed faintly with footsteps, the distant clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the sharp bark of orders from guards outside. It was a house alive with duty, with watchfulness, with the constant hum of power that came from being the stronghold of one of the most feared alphas in the territory. And yet, within Ella's quarters, that noise seemed to die at the threshold, Her chamber was not small. Its high windows stretched nearly to the ceiling, its walls dressed in heavy velvet curtains and tapestries meant to display the wealth of Ironfang. But despite its opulence, it was still a cage, a gilded prison. Here, there was an intimacy that was not chosen but forced. Just her unborn child, and the strange uncertainty of her new life. On this particular morning, Ella sat by the window. The sheer curtains caught the sunlight and spilled it across her lap in golden streams, warming her skin, but doing little to chase away the weight she carried. She absently rubbed her belly, her fingers tracing small protective circles. Her thoughts were restless, tangled between fear, resignation, and something else she hated to admit. Something she had begun to feel creeping in despite herself. A cautious, unwanted curiosity about Adrian. The man was infuriating, commanding, cold, and relentless in his authority. And yet, he was also unpredictable. In some moments, ruthless. In others, almost human. The door creaked open, startling her. Her heart gave a sharp thud. She expected the soft shuffle of a maid carrying fresh linens, or perhaps Matt arriving with his steady, disarming calm. But instead, the figure that stepped through the doorway froze her in place. It was Adrian, the Alpha, but not the Alpha she was used to. He wasn't dressed in his usual commanding suits that screamed dominance and prestige. Instead, he wore a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, as though he had tried to dress casually and failed miserably at the attempt. His presence still filled the room, but there was something different in it, an awkwardness that felt foreign to him, almost boyish. He stood there for a long moment, silent, staring at her as if he had forgotten what to say. Ella arched an eyebrow. "You're staring," she said dryly, breaking the silence. Adrian cleared his throat, his posture stiffening. "I was making sure you're comfortable." "Comfortable?" Her voice carried a quiet laugh, though there was no humor in it. "I'm a prisoner with silk sheets. Comfort is relative." His jaw twitched, and to her surprise, he didn't retaliate with sharp words as he usually did. Instead, he shifted on his feet, awkward in a way that unsettled her more than his anger ever could. "Matt told me it would be better if I tried to be present with you." She tilted her head, studying him with a mixture of amusement and suspicion. "And what does being present mean to an alpha who's used to commanding his pack and intimidating council halls?" Adrian's jaw tightened again, his fingers flexing at his sides. "It means..." He gestured vaguely toward the tray he carried in, almost as if he regretted it halfway through. "Breakfast." Ella blinked, caught off guard. The Alpha of Ironfang, ruthless, immovable, feared by enemies across the territory, was standing in her room holding a tray of scrambled eggs, toast, and fruit, like a nervous teenager trying to impress someone. She stared at him, the corner of her mouth betraying the smallest twitch of a smile. "You made that?" she asked, her tone dripping with skepticism. His eyes narrowed, instantly defensive. "No, the staff did, but I carried it here myself." The absurdity of it cracked through her defenses, and a soft laugh escaped her lips before she could stop it. It wasn't mocking, not truly. It was just too unexpected. "So you played delivery boy," she teased lightly. "How noble." Adrian set the tray down on the table beside her with a muttered, "Ungrateful." But there was no venom in his tone, no cutting edge that usually laced his words. Instead, a faint color rose in his ears, betraying his discomfort. Ella's gaze lingered on him longer than she intended. For once, he didn't look like the unshakable Alpha. He looked like a man fumbling in a role he didn't know how to play, and she wasn't sure what to make of that. Later that day, Matt found Adrian in his office, grumbling as he flipped through files piled high on his desk. The office, with its polished oak shelves and looming maps pinned to the walls, usually radiated order and control. Today, however, Adrian looked like he'd been dropped into chaos. "You look like you swallowed vinegar," Matt remarked casually, closing the door behind him as he strolled in. Adrian's glare shot up instantly. "I tried," he snapped, his voice low but frustrated. "Like you suggested, I brought her food." Matt raised his brows, trying and failing not to grin. "And?" "She laughed at me." Matt chuckled, dropping into the chair opposite him. "That's good. Pregnant women need laughter. It reduces stress." Adrian groaned, dragging a large hand down his face. "I don't know what I'm doing, Matt. I can run this pack, command warriors, negotiate with enemies who want our heads. But one woman, makes me feel like an idiot." Matt smirked knowingly, leaning back in his chair. "Because you can order her to be grateful, Adrian. You actually have to, care." The Alpha growled low in annoyance, the sound rumbling like distant thunder. But he didn't deny it. The days that followed became a strange dance of trial and error. Adrian began appearing at Ella's side at the most unexpected times. His efforts were clumsy, awkward, often rigid, but undeniably genuine in their own way. One afternoon, he walked into her room with a stack of books balanced in his arms. They landed on her table with a heavy thud that made her jump. "What's this?" Ella asked, eyeing the pile suspiciously. "Matt said pregnant women like to educate themselves," Adrian muttered, clearing his throat. His broad shoulders looked almost too large for the vulnerability in his voice. "So I had the library staff collect material. Nutrition, child development, parenting." Ella lifted the top book, flipping through glossy pages of smiling mothers and swaddled babies. Her lips twitched as she closed it. "You think I'm going to raise a baby out of a manual?" His eyes narrowed, sharp. "It's better than ignorance." She tilted her head, amused. "And what about you? Going to read the Alpha's Guide to Fatherhood in your free time?" His lips pressed into a thin line, but there was no true anger behind it. "If it exists, I'll find it." This time she laughed freely, an unguarded melodic sound that filled the room like sunlight spilling through the curtains. And though Adrian didn't say it, the sound made something in his chest tighten unexpectedly. But not everyone in the estate found this new closeness amusing. In another wing of the mansion, Vanessa paced furiously in her private sitting room. Her usually pristine hair had loosened from her constant tugging, and her carefully manicured nails clicked sharply against the side of her wineglass. The sight of Ella being given such attention, of her Adrian lowering himself to care for a nobody, was unbearable. Margaret and Richard sat across from her, each with a glass of brandy, their expressions practiced and calm. "Vanessa," Margaret said soothingly, her tone as smooth as silk, "you mustn't let this rattle you. Adrian is stubborn. He digs his heels in when challenged." Richard added, his voice firm, "But this girl is temporary. Once she has the child, the matter is finished. She's no wife, no mate, no equal. Just a vessel." Vanessa's lips curled bitterly, her voice trembling with venom. "And until then, I'm expected to watch him fuss over her like she's some precious jewel? He never looked at me that way." Margaret leaned forward, taking Vanessa's hand in hers. "You must bear it for now. When the heir is born, Adrian will come to his senses. We'll make sure of it." Richard nodded in agreement. "You're the suitable one, Vanessa. The pack knows it. The elders know it. Once the child is secured, we'll dispose of the outsider." Vanessa exhaled shakily, clinging to their assurances. But beneath the calm of their words, jealousy burned through her veins hotter than fire. She whispered under her breath, so softly neither elder could hear, "She won't live long enough to enjoy what's mine." Meanwhile, Ella's world was slowly shifting. She still felt the sting of whispers in the halls, the judgmental glares of servants who barely hid their disdain, the weight of being treated as both fragile and despised. But Adrian's fumbling attempts at care, though often frustrating, had begun to chip away at the walls she had built around herself. He wasn't warm, never warm. But he was trying, and sometimes trying was more disarming than perfection. One evening, as she struggled to bend down and fasten her shoes, Adrian entered without knocking. She huffed in annoyance, her small swollen belly making the task near impossible. Before she could protest, he knelt. Ella froze as his large hands, surprisingly gentle, tied the laces of her shoes with careful precision. She stared down at him, startled. "I could have asked a maid." "You didn't," he said simply, finishing the knot and rising smoothly to his feet. Her throat tightened unexpectedly, her chest constricting in a way she couldn't explain. She hated herself for it, but for just a moment she saw not the Iron Alpha, but a man, awkward, uncertain, trying to be more than command and authority. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. Chapter 5. The Truth Revealed. The morning sun spilled across the Ironfang estate like liquid gold. It glazed the towering stone walls with warmth and filtered through the tall windows of Adrian's office, casting fractured beams across the polished floor. Dust motes glimmered in the light, turning lazily in the still air. Papers lay scattered across the massive mahogany desk, untouched, though they bore the weight of pack affairs, border patrol schedules, trade agreements, and territorial disputes. Normally, Adrian dealt with such matters with a sharp efficiency that made him both respected and feared, but today, and increasingly in recent weeks, his mind had not been on Ironfang business. He leaned back in his chair, storm-gray eyes distant, the quill abandoned at his fingertips. He wasn't listening to the tick of the grandfather clock, or the faint calls of the guards changing shifts outside. His thoughts were elsewhere. Matt noticed. The beta stood by the bookshelf, hands clasped behind his back, watching his alpha with that quiet, knowing amusement only a second-in-command could wear. Adrian Ironfang was not a man easily unsettled. He was carved from iron, unyielding, implacable. But lately all it took was the faintest sound in the halls, the gentle lilt of a laugh, or the soft cadence of a woman's voice, and Adrian's hand would still, his head would lift, his whole body pausing as though listening for something only he could hear. That voice belonged to Ella, and it was driving Vanessa mad. Vanessa's jealousy had become a poison, burning hotter with every passing day. No amount of fine wine, whispered reassurances from Richard, or carefully curated appearances at social gatherings could ease the clawing envy that gnawed inside her. She was beautiful, undeniably so. Every inch of her spoke of refinement and control, hair always gleaming, nails immaculate, wardrobe chosen to highlight her natural allure. Men had worshipped her, women envied her. For years, she had believed her place in Adrian's life was secure. But beauty, she was learning, was not enough. How could she compete with the quiet presence of a nobody, a woman who didn't even know who had fathered her child? And yet somehow Ella, fragile, haunted, scandalous, had become the axis around which Adrian's attention turned. Vanessa could not tolerate it. So, one crisp morning, she decided to act. Her sleek black car gleamed as it rolled out of the Ironfang gates. Vanessa sat in the back, dark glasses shielding her sharp green eyes, her posture flawless, every line of her body exuding control. But beneath the polished exterior, rage simmered. "Stormbane outskirt villages," she told the driver coolly. The man hesitated. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and the car veered onto the winding road that snaked toward the outskirts of Lichen Ridge. The journey took them far from the manicured lawns and marble halls of Ironfang. The paved roads narrowed into cracked stone paths. The air grew heavier, tinged with smoke from wood fires and the earthy scent of soil and livestock. Stormbane outskirts was a different world. Wooden houses, weather-worn and patched, leaned close together. Laundry fluttered on lines strung between crooked posts. Children darted barefoot through the streets, their laughter wild and unrestrained. As Vanessa stepped out of the car, heads turned. Villagers stared openly at the elegant woman in silk, her heels clicking against the uneven stones. Some gazed in awe at her beauty and poise. Others squinted in suspicion, muttering to each other about wolves that came dressed like queens. She did not falter. She walked as though the dirt beneath her heels was marble. At the well in the center of the village, a group of women were drawing water. Their hands were rough, their clothes plain, but their eyes sharp. Vanessa approached, her expression politely detached. "Do you know a woman named Ella?" she asked smoothly, her tone clipped and polished. The women exchanged looks. One, older with lines etched deep into her face, adjusted the bucket rope before answering. "Ella?" she said slowly. We know her. Poor girl vanished for 3 years. Returned one day out of nowhere, belly swollen with a child, and no memory of where she'd been or who the father was. She brought shame on her kin. Another woman, younger but harder, spat into the dirt. Her aunt sent her out. Couldn't stomach the disgrace. The words carried weight. Vanessa's lips curved upward, satisfaction gleaming in her eyes as each revelation sharpened into a weapon. She asked a few more careful questions, listening to the villagers weave Ella's story in fragments of scorn and pity. By the time she returned to her car, Vanessa already knew how she would use it. That afternoon, she stormed into Adrian's office without knocking. The heavy doors slammed against the wall, echoing through the chamber. Adrian looked up from his desk, his expression sharpening instantly. His storm-gray eyes narrowed. "Vanessa," he said flatly, already bracing himself. "I went to her village," Vanessa began, her voice dripping with cold fury. "Do you know what I found?" Adrian didn't answer, though his silence was answer enough. "She disappeared for 3 years," Vanessa pressed, her green eyes flashing. "Came back pregnant, without even knowing the father, and you—" She jabbed a manicured finger toward him. "You brought that scandal into this house, into our estate. Do you have any idea how this looks?" Adrian leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable, his calm unnerving. The silence stretched, heavy as stone, until at last he spoke. Regardless of how or who Ella got pregnant from, he said evenly, each word deliberate, "I'm legally the father of her child now. That's all that matters." Vanessa's mouth fell open. For a moment she seemed truly stunned. "You can't be serious." "I am," he replied, voice cold as steel. "This is my decision. Mine, not yours, not the council's, not even my parents'. And I'll hear no more about it." Fury blazed in Vanessa's emerald eyes. Her beautiful face twisted with a rage she couldn't mask. With a sharp turn, she stormed from the room, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. The echo of her steps trailed like thunder down the hall. Silence lingered in her absence. Matt, who had been waiting just outside, entered with careful steps. He raised a brow. That went well. Adrian shot him a glare sharp enough to silence most men. But with Matt, the irritation softened almost instantly. "I want you to dig deeper into Ella's past," Adrian said. His voice carried an edge now, quieter but more dangerous. "Everything. I need to know." Matt studied him, a faint smirk tugging his lips. "Starting to feel attached, are you?" Adrian didn't answer, but his silence was enough. A week later, Matt returned. He entered the Alpha's office with a file tucked under his arm, his expression uncharacteristically sober. He laid the papers on Adrian's desk with a quiet finality. "She lost her mother young," Matt said, his voice softer than usual. "Grew up under her aunt who, let's just say, was not kind. Neighbors say the woman treated Ella like a burden, more servant than niece. Eventually, when Ella returned, pregnant and confused, her aunt cast her out, said she'd brought shame on the family." Adrian's hands curled into fists on the desk, veins standing rigid on his knuckles. His jaw locked, storm-gray eyes flashing with fury. She was just a girl, And they turned her out? Matt nodded grimly. She survived on her own. That says a lot. For a moment, Adrian's face was a mask of control, but beneath it something shifted. Not pity, never pity. What stirred in him was deeper, primal. A protective instinct surged in his chest, raw and unshakable. This wasn't about securing an heir anymore. It was about shielding Ella and the child from a world that had failed them. Silently, Adrian swore no one would harm her again. Not villagers, not his pack, not Vanessa. Weeks passed. The Ironfang mansion began to feel different. Subtle changes, like a new current in the air, carried whispers through its halls. Ella, restless from days of confinement, began sneaking into the gardens. The estate grounds stretched wide, filled with roses climbing trellises, neat rows of lavender, and thick hedges that offered pockets of quiet. The scent of herbs clung to the breeze. There, Ella found comfort. Kneeling in the soil, trimming stems, keeping her hands busy, it gave her a fragile sense of control in a world where she had none. One afternoon, as she clipped a stubborn stalk of lavender, the shears slipped. The sharp metal sliced across her finger. "Ah!" she gasped, dropping the shears as blood welled bright against her pale skin. Before she could even register the sting, he was there. Adrian moved like a storm, swift, silent, unstoppable. He must have smelled the faint trace of blood from across the grounds, because in an instant he was kneeling beside her, eyes blazing with alarm. What happened? His hands closed gently but firmly around hers, lifting her bleeding finger as though it were the most important thing in the world. "It's just a cut," she said, startled by his urgency. "Really, it's—" "Just a cut?" he snapped, glaring at the wound as though it had dared insult him. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and pressed it carefully to her skin. "You should have been more careful." Ella blinked at him, caught between surprise and exasperation. The Alpha of Ironfang, ruthless, cold, feared, was scolding her over a scratch. "I trim flowers, Adrian," she said, her voice incredulous. "Not handle swords. Accidents happen." "Not with you," he muttered, almost to himself. "Not while I'm here." The intensity in his tone silenced her. She stared at him, her heart knocking against her ribs as he bent his head, wrapping her finger with painstaking care. From the terrace above, servants had gathered quietly, whispering among themselves, their eyes wide. "Have you seen him?" one maid breathed. The Alpha himself wrapped her wound. "He's obsessed with her," another murmured, shaking her head. "I've never seen him like this." And indeed, it was true. When Ella wasn't near, Adrian prowled the halls like a restless wolf, his temper short, his patience thinner than ever. Panic gripped him in moments he couldn't explain, until he caught her scent or heard her laugh, and only then did the tightness in his chest ease. It was madness, it was dangerous, and yet it was undeniable. Adrian Ironfang, the cold Alpha feared across Lichen Ridge, was changing, and it was all because of her. Chapter 6. The Luna Question. The Ironfang mansion had never been louder, not from shouts, not from footsteps, not even from the clang of swords in the training grounds outside, but from whispers. They crawled through the corridors like serpents, slipping under doors, curling around corners, seeping into every chamber and ear. Servants bowed when they passed Ella's wing, their heads lowered in perfect submission, but the moment they were gone, they huddled in doorways, voices hushed but urgent, eyes flicking toward the Alpha's newest resident. "Did you hear?" one maid breathed, clutching the laundry to her chest. "They say she doesn't even know who the father is." "Not just that," another replied, wringing her hands. "She's from Stormbane, an outcast. How can someone like that possibly be the next Alpha's mother?" A third servant shook her head, her face pale. "If the Alpha has truly chosen her, then he's lost his mind. The elders will never allow it." The rumor spread fast, like sparks tossed onto dry hay. By mid-morning they had become a roaring blaze, feeding on themselves until even the high-ranking members of the pack began to murmur in corners, their faces creased with worry or disdain. And though Ella sat quietly by the window in her chamber, her hands folded protectively over her belly, she could feel every whisper pressing against her skin like knives. She kept her eyes fixed on the gardens, listening to the songs of the sparrows flitting through the hedges. But her heart raced all the same. Each murmur seeped through the cracks of her door, tainting the very air she breathed. She tried not to cry. She tried to remind herself that she had endured worse, that she had faced shame, abandonment, and cruelty long before this. But here, in this house of polished marble and iron power, the cruelty carried new teeth. It was sharper, colder, wrapped in elegance and tradition that sought to crush her under its weight. In the grand hall, Vanessa waited. She was radiant, as always. Her gown was silk dyed a rich emerald that shimmered in the torchlight. Her dark hair swept into a perfect knot that revealed the sharp planes of her cheekbones. Her lips were painted a bold red, her nails gleamed like polished rubies, and her entire figure radiated confidence. But it was her eyes that betrayed her. Sharp green eyes, gleaming not with warmth, but with poison. She leaned against the carved banister of the grand staircase, her head tilted ever so slightly, her smile cold. The moment had come, the one she had prepared for, sharpened like a dagger, and now she would strike. Gathered before her were several of Ironfang's highest-ranking pack members, commanders, advisors, wealthy allies who had supported the family for decades. They lingered in clusters, murmuring among themselves, their expressions tight with unease. Even Richard and Margaret, Adrian's parents, stood among them. Margaret's lips were pressed into a thin line, her posture poised but calculating. Richard shifted his weight from foot to foot, his jaw tight, his eyes darting toward the floor as if already weary of what was about to unfold. Vanessa's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade wrapped in velvet. "She is a nobody," she declared, her words slow, deliberate, meant to echo. "And worse, she doesn't even know who fathered her child." Gasps fluttered among the crowd. Even those who had heard the whispers stiffened now, the words sharper when spoken aloud in the grand hall. Vanessa stepped forward, every inch the perfect politician cloaked in beauty. Her gown trailed behind her as she lifted her chin, her smile turning brittle. "How can such a woman," she continued, "be worthy to stand beside our Alpha? To be the mother of the next Alpha of Ironfang? Our pack deserves better than an outcast with shame in her blood." Adrian stopped in the center, his gaze locking with Vanessa's. His silence was heavier than any roar. For a long moment, the entire estate seemed to hold still, waiting for his answer. And then his voice came, low, steady, steel wrapped in calm. Not another word against her. The command rippled through the air, carrying the weight of alpha dominance. Several pack members flinched, their eyes dropping instantly. Even Richard's spine stiffened. Vanessa blinked, caught off guard, but she recovered quickly, her voice rising, desperate to sway the room. "Adrian, you don't see it. You're blinded by pity, by some attachment. She will ruin you. She will ruin this pack." Adrian's jaw flexed. His hands curled into fists at his sides, but his voice remained controlled, deadly. His gaze swept the room, landing briefly on his mother, then his father, before returning to Vanessa. "You think I need your permission to decide who stands beside me?" he asked, each word sharp as a blade. "You think my choice as Alpha is up for debate?" Vanessa faltered but pressed on. "But she is mine." The words sliced the air cleanly, leaving no room for argument. His voice rose now, cold and final, carrying to every corner of the hall. "Ella belongs here, and whether you approve or not, whether anyone in this room approves or not, no one." His gaze cut like lightning across the gathered faces, lingering on his parents, his commanders, then Vanessa. No one raises their voice against her. Not you, not my parents, not anyone. The silence that followed was deafening. The air itself seemed to bow beneath his dominance. And then, a soft creak. Every head turned upward. Ella's door had opened. She stood at the top of the staircase, pale in the light of the high windows, her hands still folded protectively over her belly. Her brown eyes were wide, shimmering, her lips parted but silent. She had heard everything. Adrian climbed the steps slowly, his footsteps measured, deliberate. Each one felt like defiance, a declaration that he would not bend to anyone's will but his own. When he reached her, he stopped just one step below, so that her gaze met his without strain. His eyes softened, his voice lowering to something only she could hear. "Don't listen to them," he murmured, his tone stripped of steel now, stripped of the Alpha's bite. "None of them matter. Only you, only us." Ella swallowed hard, her lips trembling as though she wanted to speak, but no words came. Instead, a single tear slipped down her cheek. Adrian lifted his hand, his touch surprisingly tender as he brushed it away. For a man feared across Lichen Ridge for his coldness, for his selfishness, for his iron will, the gesture was almost shocking. The pack might not understand. His parents might disapprove. Vanessa might fight with every ounce of venom in her veins. But Adrian knew one truth with absolute certainty. Ella was his choice. And no one, not Vanessa, not his parents, not the entire Ironfang Council, would ever take that away from him. Her nails scraped across the carved wood of the mantel as she stopped pacing. "If Adrian will not see reason," she muttered to her reflection in the mirror, her voice a venomous hiss, "then Ella must." The following afternoon, Ella sought refuge in the gardens. The gardens of Ironfang Mansion were vast and carefully tended, stretching in symmetrical rows of roses, tulips, and lavender bushes that released their fragrance with every breeze. Marble benches rested beneath pergolas of climbing ivy, and fountains gurgled softly, the water catching sunlight like spilled diamonds. Here she found peace. Here she could almost forget the stairs, the whispers, the tension in the halls. She crouched near a row of roses, pruning gently with silver shears. The sun kissed her face, warm and steady, and for a few moments she breathed easily. That was when Vanessa appeared. Her presence was sharp, like a blade slicing into the quiet calm. She wore a flowing crimson gown, its rich fabric moving like blood against the greenery. Her dark hair tumbled in waves over her shoulders. Her lips painted a deeper shade of red. Cold calculation burned in her eyes as she walked deliberately down the gravel path, her heels crunching against the stones until she came to a stop a few feet away from Ella. "Enjoying yourself?" Vanessa asked, her tone dripping with deceptive sweetness. Ella's shoulders stiffened. She set the shears down gently, rising to her feet. "I was," she said evenly. "The garden is peaceful." Vanessa tilted her head, studying her like one might study prey before the strike. "Peaceful," she repeated softly. "Perhaps too peaceful, considering who you've tied yourself to." Ella forced her breathing steady. "If you came here to insult me, you'll be disappointed. I don't rattle easily." A small, humorless laugh slipped from Vanessa's lips. "Insult you?" "Oh no, Ella. I came to warn you." She stepped closer, her perfume wafting sharp in the air. "You see, Adrian is not the man you think he is. He may play the attentive mate now, the doting alpha, but don't let him fool you. Adrian is dangerous." Ella's heart skipped, but she masked her unease, folding her arms across her chest. "Dangerous how?" Vanessa leaned in, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "Do you think his reputation was built on kindness? On generosity? No. Adrian is ruthless. If something doesn't suit him, he discards it, or destroys it. That is who he is. He has spilled blood without hesitation. He can kill without remorse. One day, when you no longer serve his purpose, what makes you think he won't turn that cruelty on you?" The words landed hard, laced with venom, meant to poison. Ella's hand instinctively pressed against the swell of her abdomen. Her stomach twisted, but she forced herself to breathe. Slowly, she lifted her chin. "I don't believe you." For the first time, Vanessa faltered. Her smile faltered, her eyes narrowing. "You should. I've known him longer than you. I was chosen to stand by his side for a reason, because I understand the man he is." "Then maybe that's your problem," Ella said softly, her voice unwavering. "You only see the man he was. I see who he is now, and even if he hasn't changed, even if some part of him remains exactly as you say, then so be it. That's his choice, his life. I'm not afraid of it." The silence stretched taut, heavy between them. Vanessa's lips parted, as if she couldn't quite comprehend what she had heard. "You defend him?" she whispered incredulously. "After everything I've told you, you defend him?" "Yes." Ella's voice was calm, steady, resolute. "I do." Unbeknownst to either of them, Adrian had been standing just beyond the hedges, his broad frame half hidden in the shade of the oaks. He had come to the gardens after a council meeting ended sooner than expected. What he found instead was a confrontation, a clash of words sharper than any blade. He had heard every syllable, every accusation, every defense, and what he felt was something unexpected, admiration. For years he had been feared, obeyed, whispered about as ruthless and cold. Few had ever seen him as anything else. But Ella had defended him, not out of obligation, not out of fear, but because she believed in him. He had never wanted anything more in his life than to keep her safe. Vanessa's face twisted with rage. Her mask of elegance cracked, revealing the raw bitterness beneath. Without another word, she spun on her heel, her gown flaring dramatically as she stormed back toward the mansion, her steps clipped and sharp. Ella let out a shaky sigh once she was gone, one hand drifting again to her belly. She had stood her ground, but unease lingered. Was Vanessa right? Could Adrian truly be so ruthless? Was she blind to a truth everyone else knew? She shook her head firmly, unwilling to let the doubt take root. Moments later, she felt Adrian before she saw him. He stepped out from behind the hedges, his presence filling the garden, his expression unreadable. Ella startled, cheeks warming. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough," he replied, his voice low. The air between them thickened, heavy with unspoken things. Ella couldn't tell if he was angry, hurt, or something else entirely. Her lips parted, searching for words. But then Adrian stepped closer, his hand rising to brush a loose strand of hair from her cheek with a gentleness that unsettled her as much as it soothed. "You defended me," he murmured, almost as if he couldn't believe it himself. Ella hesitated, then nodded. "Of course I did." Something flickered in his dark eyes, something warm, dangerous, unguarded. He said nothing more, but the way he looked at her lingered long after he walked her back to the house. But Vanessa was not done. Days passed, and Ella began to notice things. The sound of footsteps too close behind her in the corridors. Shadows shifting in the gardens at night where none should be. Unfamiliar scents on the air that didn't belong to Ironfang wolves. At first, she told herself it was paranoia. But then a heavy vase toppled from a ledge in the library, shattering just inches from where she had been standing. A carriage wheel came loose on the cobbled road while she rode inside, sending the vehicle swerving before it crashed to a halt. And worst of all, one dusky evening in the orchard, two unfamiliar rogues appeared, their eyes sharp and hungry as they cornered her. She screamed, they lunged. And before they could touch her, the guards came running at Adrian's command. The rogues fled into the trees before they could be caught. That night, Adrian stormed into her chambers like a man barely restraining his fury. "You're not safe here," he growled, pacing the length of her room like a caged predator. His fists were clenched, his jaw tight, his breath ragged. Ella, perched on the edge of her bed, lifted her chin stubbornly. "I can handle myself." He froze, whirling on her. No, you can't. They're coming for you, for our child. Every enemy I've ever made knows you're the easiest way to get to me. You think trimming roses and taking walks will protect you? His voice cracked with raw emotion. You need me, Ella. You need to trust me. Her hands tightened in her lap. And what happens when trusting you means losing myself? You can't lock me away, Adrian. I won't be a prisoner in your house. The clash of wills filled the air like lightning. Her independence, sharp and fierce, collided with his relentless protectiveness. Adrian's chest heaved as he fought to master his temper. Then he stepped closer, his voice lowering to a rough murmur. Then meet me halfway. Don't fight me when I'm trying to keep you alive. Ella's heart hammered. She searched his face, desperate to see past the ruthless alpha everyone whispered about, desperate to know if he truly meant it. And what she found in his eyes was sincerity. Burning, unshakable. For the first time she believed him. She nodded slowly. Fine. But you have to promise me, Adrian. You won't treat me like I'm helpless. I am not weak. His lips curved into the faintest smirk, almost rueful. That's what scares me the most. Danger circled Ironfang like vultures. Vanessa's schemes had cracked the door open for enemies, but instead of breaking Adrian and Ella apart, every attempt only drew them closer. Adrian's instincts as a protector sharpened, his attachment to Ella deepened, and though doubt still whispered in her heart, Ella found herself relying on him in ways she had never imagined. Neither of them spoke the truth aloud, but both knew it. This was only the beginning. Chapter 8. An Uneasy Pact. The tension in Ironfang Mansion had grown so thick that even the staff whispered in hushed voices as they went about their duties. Ella could feel it pressing down on her everywhere she went. The eyes that followed her in the hallways, the half-hidden scowls, the weight of danger stalking her in the shadows. Servants avoided lingering too long when delivering trays to her quarters. Guards stiffened whenever she passed, as though her presence carried with it both trouble and responsibility. Even the grand corridors, once echoing with polished formality, seemed darker now, the flickering sconces throwing restless shadows against the walls. Ella told herself she would not bend, that she would not cower. She had lived through worse. She had survived betrayal, hunger, and fear long before Adrian Ironfang had dragged her into his world. Yet every time she placed a protective hand on the curve of her stomach, she was reminded that it wasn't only her life at stake anymore. And that changed everything. Adrian had been relentless since the orchard incident. Guards had been doubled, the gates fortified until they resembled a fortress, and his beta, Matt, shadowed her almost constantly. If she moved from the library to the garden, Matt was there. If she sat on the veranda to breathe in the evening air, Matt lingered nearby, pretending to be casual while his eyes scanned the perimeter. Ella resented it, resented the way her independence was being stripped from her piece by piece, but late at night, when she thought of the cold, hungry look in those rogues' eyes, she also felt a creeping relief. Perhaps, she admitted in the quiet of her thoughts, Adrian was right. Still, admitting it to herself was one thing, admitting it to him was another. It was on one such evening, when the manor had quieted and the staff were retreating into their quarters, that she found him in his study. The door was slightly ajar, golden light spilling into the hallway. She hesitated before knocking, her palm hovering just above the polished wood. Inside, Adrian sat behind a massive oak desk, papers scattered before him. His broad frame bent as he scribbled something with sharp precision. The room smelled faintly of ink, leather, and the earthy musk that clung to him. The steady scratch of his pen was the only sound. His expression was stern, focused, as though the weight of 100 decisions rested on his shoulders. Ella swallowed hard, then pushed the door open further and stepped in. He didn't look up immediately. "You shouldn't be walking around alone," he muttered, his tone curt but laced with concern. His pen didn't pause. He was too accustomed to multitasking, issuing orders with one hand while signing decrees with the other. She bristled at his words but forced her voice to remain calm. I came to talk, not to argue. That made him glance up. His dark eyes softened, just a little, before he set the pen aside with deliberate care. Then sit, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Ella lowered herself slowly, smoothing the fabric of her simple dress, the chair creaking faintly beneath her weight. The silence stretched, oppressive and heavy, until she finally found the courage to speak. I don't like being caged, Adrian. I never will. Her voice trembled, but she lifted her chin. But I can't deny what's happening. Whoever is coming after me, they won't stop, and I... Her hand instinctively rested on her belly. I can't take that risk. Adrian leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. His gaze was unreadable, sharp and searching. So, you'll let me protect you? Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded. For the baby's sake. Something flickered across his face, a mix of triumph and something gentler, harder to place. He didn't gloat, didn't smirk, but his posture shifted, as though a burden had been lifted from his chest. Then we're agreed, he said quietly. Your safety, and the child's, becomes my first priority. No arguments. Ella opened her mouth to protest but stopped herself. Instead, she forced herself to meet his gaze. No arguments. For a moment it felt like they were bound by something more than words, an invisible thread, fragile but undeniable. The silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't suffocating. It was charged, pulsing with something neither of them wanted to name. The next morning, Ella was summoned back to his study. This time, the atmosphere was different. Adrian wasn't bent over paperwork. He was standing beside a man in a sleek suit, a lawyer by the look of him. The man's briefcase rested neatly on the desk, and papers were stacked in crisp piles, heavy with legal stamps and seals. Ella frowned, her fingers curling around the frame of the doorway. What is this? Adrian's expression was calm, almost casual, but his eyes betrayed the intensity of the moment. This, he said, tapping the stack of papers with 2 fingers, is the trust fund I've created for the child. Half of my wealth, every estate, every account, every asset under the Ironfang name, is now tied to them. No one can touch it. Not my parents, not the pack, not even me. Ella's breath caught. The words rattled inside her like stones in a jar. She stared at him, trying to understand the magnitude of what he was saying. Half of your wealth? She echoed, her voice almost a whisper. Yes, Adrian said, his tone firm, unyielding. This ensures the child's future. Whatever happens to me, whatever happens between us, it won't matter. They'll be secure, protected. She shook her head slowly, her heart pounding. Why would you do this? Adrian's gaze softened in a way she rarely saw. Because this child will be mine. Not by blood, maybe, but by choice. And I protect what is mine, Ella. Always. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, and it struck her like a blow. She wanted to argue, to accuse him of trying to buy her trust. But she couldn't. Her eyes stung, and she blinked rapidly, unwilling to let tears fall in front of him. You didn't have to do this, she whispered. Yes, Adrian replied quietly, stepping closer, his presence enveloping her like a storm that refused to pass. I did. The lawyer cleared his throat awkwardly, shifting his weight as though he had intruded upon something intimate. Adrian dismissed him with a curt nod, and the man gathered the papers and left, shutting the heavy oak door behind him. They were alone. Ella tried to compose herself, but the words tumbled out before she could stop them. You confuse me, Adrian. One moment you're cold and impossible, and the next you're... this. Do you even know what you're doing? His lips curved in the faintest of smirks. No. But I know what I want, and right now that's making sure you and the child never doubt where you stand. Her chest tightened painfully, and she looked away, afraid of what he might see in her expression. You don't make things easy, you know. Good, he murmured, stepping closer still, his shadow falling across her. Easy has never been worth it. Their eyes met, the air between them charged, humming with unspoken truths, and for one fleeting moment, Ella felt something shift inside her. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was trust, the first fragile seed of it. Later that night, as she lay in her quarters, Ella found herself replaying the scene over and over in her head. The papers, the weight of his words, the way he had looked at her like she was more than just the vessel for his heir. She pressed her hand gently to her belly, whispering into the quiet, maybe he really will protect us. And for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to fall asleep without fear. But outside the walls of the mansion, danger continued to brew. In distant halls, enemies whispered. In her wing of the mansion, Vanessa seethed, jealousy curling around her like a serpent. And in the Ironfang patriarch's private quarters, Richard and Margaret plotted in shadows, their voices low, their intentions sharper than knives. Yet within the heart of Ironfang estate, a fragile pact had been sealed, a bond not of love, but of necessity. And though neither Ella nor Adrian realized it yet, that bond would soon become the only thing standing between them and the storm that was coming. Chapter 9. Fury of the Elders. The Ironfang estate awoke to a strange kind of urgency that morning. Normally, mornings here were slow and orderly, the clink of silver trays, the muted chatter of servants exchanging their first tasks, the quiet shuffle of papers from Richard Ironfang's grand office. But on this day, the rhythms of the house broke. Richard himself, former Alpha Richard, a man whose pride rested in being untouchable, unreachable, always observing from above, stepped down into the courtyards. His sleeves were rolled up, his broad hands gesturing with sharp precision as he barked orders. The sight of him in the open air, walking among the workers, sent ripples of unease through the estate. Every servant, every laborer, every pair of eyes tracked him nervously. He was not a man to leave his office unless something was wrong. The reason was the ball. The annual Ironfang Ball was no ordinary celebration. It was a display of wealth, unity, and dominance, the kind of night that drew not only loyal pack members but also allies, dignitaries, and rivals from across Lichen Ridge. It was a spectacle carefully curated to remind the region that the Ironfangs remained unshaken, unchallenged. Every cobblestone had to gleam, every chandelier had to blaze with light, every silver goblet had to sparkle like it had been hammered from the moon. Tradition dictated that Margaret, Adrian's mother, directed the preparations. She had always been the poised hostess, the silent iron fist behind the silks and candles. But this year, Richard had insisted on taking control himself. He said it was about maintaining standards. The truth was uglier. He no longer trusted the atmosphere in his own household. Whispers between servants, tension between Ella and Vanessa, Adrian's blatant defiance. It had festered until Richard felt the rot crawling beneath his skin. The Alpha of Ironfang would not sit idly by while his house unraveled. So he descended. Workers scurried about like startled ants. Long dining tables were polished until reflections stared back from the wood. Velvet drapes were beaten until dust clouds choked the corridors. Outside, gardeners clipped hedges into unnatural perfection, the blades of their shears snapping in rhythm. Others clambered up ladders to hang banners in the deep red and gold of the Ironfang crest, colors that screamed dominance and bloodline. And then came the discovery. It was in one of the old wings of the estate, unused, forgotten, left to gather cobwebs and mildew, a storage room near the servants' quarters, its door long stuck from disuse. A young housemaid, no older than 16, tugged the sheets off a pile of crates. Her hand brushed against something cold. Curious, she pulled harder, dragging free a heavy trunk buried beneath cloth. When the lid gave way, she gasped. Inside lay strange things, black candles melted into twisted, unnatural shapes, bone fragments wrapped carefully in cloth. glass jars filled with herbs and substances that shimmered oddly under the light. The air around the trunk seemed to thicken, heavy and stale, carrying with it the metallic tang of secrets best left buried. Her bundle of rags slipped from her trembling hands. "My lord, Richard!" she cried, her voice cracking with fear. Richard turned, his jaw already tight from irritation at the sluggish pace of preparations. His boots struck the stone as he approached, the servants shrinking back in his wake. "What now?" His voice was sharp, commanding. "Speak up, girl." The maid pointed a shaking finger at the trunk. Her lips quivered, words stuck in her throat. Richard shoved past her and looked. The sight froze him for a moment, his broad shoulders stiffening. Then his face darkened like a thunderhead. His voice exploded, filling the hall with a roar that shook the very walls. "Witchcraft." The word spread like fire. Workers froze mid-step, their brushes and cloths falling limp. Some crossed themselves instinctively, muttering half-forgotten prayers, while others exchanged wide-eyed looks of panic. Margaret hurried forward, skirts gathered in her hands, her face pale as milk. "Richard, what is it?" He kicked the trunk with the polished toe of his boot, sending the bones rattling against the jars. "This filth," he spat. "Witchcraft, in my house." A collective gasp rose from the workers. They whispered to one another in frantic voices, the word bouncing from tongue to tongue until it became something monstrous. "Where did these come from?" Richard demanded, his voice a growl. His gaze snapped from one servant to the next, each shrinking back as though caught guilty. "Who dares bring this poison into my home?" The murmur sharpened, suspicion seeking a target. It didn't take long before one name surfaced, hissed through clenched teeth. "Ella," a maid whispered. "It must belong to her. She's the only new one." The accusation cut the air like a blade. Richard's head turned slowly, his eyes narrowing with dangerous satisfaction. Of course. His voice was venom. Of course. The girl has bewitched my son. There's no other explanation for his rebellion, for his obsession with her. Margaret's lips trembled as she tried to interject. "Richard, wait. Perhaps we should be certain before making such accusations. These things could be—" "Do not defend her," Richard snarled, silencing her instantly. His fury reverberated across the hall. "I warned Adrian about bringing a nobody into this estate, and now look. Evidence of sorcery rotting under my roof." The crowd shifted, eyes darting nervously toward the staircase. For there stood Ella. She had been drawn by the noise, her steps cautious, her hand resting protectively over her rounded belly. Her hair was loose about her shoulders, her face pale but steady as her eyes fell on the trunk, and then on Richard. The workers whispered louder now, their fear and suspicion aimed at her like knives. "What is this?" she asked at last, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. Richard stepped forward, looming like a storm. "This," he spat, pointing at the trunk, "is proof that you've bewitched my son. Dark magic, hidden in my home. You dare corrupt this pack with your filth?" Ella's lips parted in disbelief. She shook her head, her voice trembling with outrage. "I've never seen those things before. I don't even know what they are. You think I'd hide such madness here?" Richard towered over her, his shadow draping across her like a cloak. "You expect me to believe that? Everything about you reeks of deceit. A nobody, appearing out of nowhere, capturing my son's loyalty while refusing to name the father of her child. And now this." The words stung, cutting deep, but before she could respond, another voice rang out. Low, commanding, final, enough. Every head turned. Adrian descended the stairs with slow, deliberate steps, each footfall echoing in the charged silence. His presence swallowed the room, his dark gaze sweeping over the trunk, the frightened workers, and finally landing on his father. "She hasn't bewitched me," he said firmly, "and if you dare accuse her again without proof, you'll answer to me." The hall held its breath. Servants dared not move. Richard's nostrils flared, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You dare speak to me this way? Defend her in front of your pack?" His voice lowered to a deadly growl. "Adrian, open your eyes. She is dragging you into ruin." Adrian's jaw tightened, his voice hard as stone. "The only ruin here is your obsession with control. Ella has done nothing but survive in a world that's treated her like dirt. And if you can't respect her, then you'll respect me." Father and son locked eyes, the weight of generations pressing down between them. The silence was heavy, thick with unspoken battles of past and future. Finally, Richard growled, the sound guttural, animalistic. He turned sharply, his coat flaring as he waved his hand dismissively. "Fine. Dismiss it. Prepare for the ball. But mark my words, Adrian, this girl will bring nothing but destruction." The trunk was dragged away, though whispers slithered after it like smoke. Ella stood frozen at the foot of the stairs, her hand trembling on her belly. Only when Adrian reached her side, slipping a protective arm around her shoulders, did she allow herself to breathe. He guided her gently away from the crowd, shielding her with his presence. But the damage was done. Though preparations for the ball continued, tension seeped into every corner of the estate. The wealth transfer Adrian had made to the unborn child's trust fund had already stoked envy among allies and resentment among rivals. Now, rumors of witchcraft threaded their way through Lichen Ridge, feeding doubt and suspicion. Allies questioned Adrian's judgment. Rivals sharpened their schemes. And so, when the evening of the ball rehearsal arrived, the air itself seemed heavy with expectation. The grand hall was a sea of light and sound. Chandeliers blazed like captured stars, flooding the marble floors with gold. Musicians played in a corner, their violins and cellos weaving melodies that stirred the crowd into elegant motion. Perfume lingered in the air, mingling with the scents of wine, roasted meats, and ambition. Alphas and betas from neighboring packs arrived in their finery, wolves with silver eyes and powerful strides. Their laughter was polite, but edged with rivalry, every smile a weapon, every handshake a calculation. It was into this charged atmosphere that Alpha Grey made his entrance. He cut a striking figure, tall, broad-shouldered, his presence as commanding as Adrian's but colder, more calculated. His dark suit gleamed, his hair slicked back with precision, his every step radiating arrogance. Conversations hushed as he crossed the hall, his gaze fixed not on Richard, not on Margaret, not even on Adrian, but on Ella. She stood at Adrian's side, dressed in a modest gown of soft blue, her hair gathered neatly, her belly unmistakable beneath the fabric. She tried to remain poised, but her fingers gripped the edge of her skirt, her heart hammering as Grey approached. "Adrian," Grey greeted smoothly, his lips curling in a smirk. "You've been busy, I hear. A child on the way, and with such unconventional company." Adrian's jaw clenched, his voice cold. "What do you want, Grey?" Grey's eyes glittered as they flicked toward Ella. "Only the truth. That child she carries, it's mine." The words cracked through the hall like thunder. Gasps rippled, fans snapped shut, and whispers swarmed like flies. Margaret clutched Richard's arm. Vanessa, standing nearby in a gown that glimmered with smug elegance, allowed herself the faintest smile. Ella's breath caught, her chest tightened painfully. "That's a lie!" she cried, her voice breaking with shock. But Grey only raised his hand. Two figures emerged from the crowd, an older woman and a man, their faces lined with years of hardship. Their clothes were plain, their presence unexpected. Ella's stomach dropped as recognition struck her like a blow. "Aunt Lydia?" she whispered. Her aunt lowered her gaze, unable to meet Ella's eyes. "It's true," she said softly, almost regretfully. "You and Grey, you were together. We saw it." "No." Ella shook her head violently, her hands trembling. "That never happened. Why would you say such a thing?" The room erupted in murmurs, scandal latching onto the words like a wolf to prey. Richard's face twisted in triumph. Margaret gasped, torn between disbelief and dread, and Adrian stood unnervingly still. Gray smirked wider, sensing victory. He stepped closer, his voice dripping with venom. "You see, Adrian? Even her family knows. She played you for a fool. That child, your so-called heir, belongs to me." The hall swirled with voices, suspicion and doubt. Ella's world tilted, betrayal slicing deeper than any blade. Her aunt's words, Gray's accusation, the crowd's judgment, it all spun around her like a storm she couldn't escape. And when she dared to glance at Adrian, what she saw nearly broke her. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't defending. He was silent and staring at her with a storm in his eyes. And in that silence, Ella realized her world was about to collapse. Chapter 10. Fractures and Doubts. The Ironfang estate had always been alive with voices. The house seemed built to carry them. The clipped footsteps of servants on polished stone, the rustle of maids passing with fresh linens, the booming tone of Richard Blackwood barking orders from his study, the lower, steadier murmur of betas gathered in the council room. It was an old house, heavy with lineage and pride, and for generations the sounds of command and duty had filled its halls like a constant tide. But lately, the air had changed. Conversations fell quieter when doors opened. Servants moved quicker, heads lowered. Even laughter, once free-flowing among the younger wolves who served in the kitchens and stables, had dulled into silence. The Ironfang estate had become a house of whispers, and though no one admitted it outright, it was as though the very walls were holding their breath, sheltering secrets too poisonous to be spoken aloud. Margaret, Adrian's mother, felt this heaviness more than most. She had been mistress of this estate long enough to know when something festered beneath the surface, when harmony was just a facade stretched thin over unrest. She had endured rivalries, betrayals, and political games before, but this shadow, thickening day by day, it chilled her bones in a way she hadn't felt since her youth. It was a quiet evening when that shadow pressed upon her too heavily to ignore. The corridors were dim, lit only by golden sconces burning low, casting stretched shadows across the silk wallpaper. Margaret's steps were soft, her nightgown trailing faintly against the floor. She hadn't planned to wander, yet her feet carried her down the long east hallway as though some unseen hand tugged her forward, toward Vanessa's chambers. Margaret frowned, puzzled at herself. She rarely visited the young woman outside of formal occasions. Vanessa was Adrian's former intended, her presence in the house already a sore point after everything that had transpired with Ella. And yet, Margaret couldn't rest. A ripple of unease urged her closer. The door was cracked open, just enough to spill a thin blade of light across the polished floor. Margaret slowed, intending to knock, but then she heard it. A voice, low, sharp, chanting words she couldn't understand. Margaret froze, breath catching. She leaned closer, the blood in her ears pounding with every syllable. And then, through the narrow gap, she saw. Vanessa was kneeling before a small table. Upon it lay a picture of Adrian and Ella, pinned in place by black candles. Their flames sputtered and twisted, as if disturbed by a phantom breeze, flickering wildly though the air in the chamber was still. The wood of the table was defiled with strange markings, symbols scrawled in some dark, sticky substance Margaret didn't dare name. They glistened wetly, as though fresh. Vanessa's lips moved rapidly, her eyes half closed. Her voice deepened unnaturally with each phrase, as though something else were speaking through her. The air inside the chamber seemed to throb, pressing outward against the walls. Heavy, suffocating. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, a horrified gasp escaping before she could stop herself. The spell broke. The candles guttered violently, wax spilling down their blackened sides. Vanessa's head whipped around, eyes glowing faintly with something feral and unearthly. Margaret stumbled back, her heart pounding. What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Vanessa rose slowly, movements deliberate, like a predator unfolding. Her expression twisted into a cruel smile that barely reached her eyes. You shouldn't have seen that, Margaret. Margaret's skin prickled with fear. Her throat was dry, yet words clawed their way out. You, black magic? In this house? With my son's picture? How dare you? Shut your mouth, Vanessa snapped, her voice venomous. She advanced, shadows clinging to her as though drawn to her malice. If you breathe a word of this, I'll kill him. Adrian, Richard, Ella, every last one of them. I'll rip this family apart, piece by piece, until all that's left is ash and sorrow. Margaret's hands shook violently. She had faced down Richard's temper, endured council feuds, but never had she felt such raw, slithering terror. For the first time, she truly feared Vanessa, not for her sharp tongue, not for her ambition, but for the darkness coiled behind her smile. Margaret's voice cracked as she forced out words. I'll keep quiet, she whispered, though her mind already raced with a desperate truth. Vanessa had to go. The days that followed stretched long and uneasy. Vanessa's presence in the estate was like a knife hidden under silk, its sharpness unseen until it was too late, and her schemes grew bolder. She sought out Gray. Late one night, cloaked in shadows, she slipped down the west wing to the guest quarters, where the rival Alpha stayed. Gray was lounging in an armchair, boots propped against the fire, a glass of dark liquor in hand. His smile deepened when she entered. Vanessa, to what do I owe this midnight visit? She shut the door behind her with a soft click, eyes gleaming. You want Ella. I can give her to you. Gray arched a brow, smirking as he swirled his glass. And what could you possibly offer me that I don't already have? Access, she purred, stepping closer, her beauty sharpened into something dangerous. Influence. I know the weak points in this family. You managed to take Ella away, and I'll see to it you gain land, power, even my allegiance. Gray leaned forward, intrigued. Why betray him? You were meant to be his Luna. Her smile hardened, venomous. Adrian was never mine to begin with. If I can't have him, then I'll make sure no one else does. Their pact was sealed with a predator's handshake, two wolves entwined by greed and bitterness. Meanwhile, Adrian wrestled with doubts that gnawed at him like teeth in the dark. Gray's accusations haunted him, the claim that the child in Ella's womb was his, the testimony of Ella's aunt. Lies, surely, but lies laced with poison sharp enough to pierce even the strongest resolve. What if Gray spoke the truth? What if Ella will be taken away from him? And yet, every time Gray drew near her, every time he dared to touch her arm or speak her name with mocking intimacy, Adrian's blood boiled. She doesn't belong near you, Adrian growled one afternoon, stepping squarely between Gray and Ella in the courtyard. His wolf surged beneath his skin, desperate to tear into the man. Gray only smirked, lifting his glass in a mocking salute. Protective, aren't we? That must mean you're not sure of her. Adrian's fists clenched so tight his knuckles whitened. Back, away. Ella, standing behind him, felt a storm of emotions. Gratitude, frustration, fear. Gratitude because part of her longed for his protection. Frustration because his silence on Gray's accusations cut her deeper than any wound. Did he doubt her? At night she lay awake, one hand resting on her belly, listening for Adrian's footsteps in the hall, wondering how long their fragile bond could endure suspicion. Margaret watched everything unfold in silence. She had not told a soul of Vanessa's ritual, but her eyes had opened wider since that night, and she began to see Ella differently. Not as an intruder, not as the nobody who had upset her son's future, but as a young woman clinging desperately to her child, fighting against storms meant to crush her. One evening, she found Adrian pacing in his study, his eyes red-rimmed, his face pale from sleepless nights. The fire crackled, throwing restless shadows across the walls. You're tearing yourself apart, Margaret said softly. Adrian raked a hand through his hair. What if he's right, Mother? What if he takes away my child? I want to believe Ella, but Gray, he brings witnesses, accusations, even her own family stands against her. Margaret stepped closer, her voice steady but firm. Then stop tormenting yourself with questions. Find the truth. Order a DNA test. If the child isn't his, no lie can touch you. If it is, you'll know what to do. Adrian froze. Slowly, his gaze lifted to hers. He nodded once, sharp, like a soldier accepting orders. The command went out the next day. His beta, Matt, was entrusted with the task. A loyal wolf, bound by oath and blood, Matt treated the mission as though he were marching to war. Vanessa, however, was not idle. She bribed technicians. She sent spies to intercept couriers. One night she even cornered Matt outside the clinic, her perfume laced with poison as she whispered, "Give me the envelope, Matt, and I'll make it worth your while. Refuse, and you'll regret it." Matt's jaw tightened. He shoved past her, gripping the envelope so tightly it crumpled. "You think you scare me? You're nothing but a shadow in this pack. I protect my alpha with my life." By the time he delivered the sealed results into Adrian's hands, his shirt was torn, his face scratched, but his eyes blazed with defiance. "It's safe," he said. "No one touched it." Adrian clasped his beta's shoulder, voice thick. "I owe you more than I can ever say." That night, the family gathered in the study. The room was tense, the fire burning low. Richard sat stiffly with his arms crossed, expression unreadable. Margaret stood behind Adrian, her hand firm on his shoulder. Ella sat pale and trembling, her hands folded protectively over her belly. Adrian broke the seal, unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned the lines. He froze. The silence was suffocating. "What does it say?" Margaret asked softly. Adrian lifted his gaze, locking onto Ella's eyes. His voice was low, steady, almost reverent. "The child is mine," Ella gasped, tears springing hot to her eyes. Relief and fear surged together, tangling in her chest. But as the truth settled, another thought struck both of them. How? They had no memory of a night together, no stolen moment, no secret passion. And yet, the undeniable truth lay on the page. The child was his. Shock rippled through the room. Richard's face twisted into something unreadable. Margaret exhaled a shaky breath of relief, and Ella trembled under the weight of it. One truth had been revealed, but the questions it raised promised to fracture everything even further. Nothing, from this night onward, would ever be the same. Chapter 11. Unraveling the Mystery. The results of the DNA test still hung in the air like smoke after a fire. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating, like a storm that refused to break. Adrian sat in the corner of his study, one hand pressed against his jaw as if holding his composure in place, while Ella lingered near the fire, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, as though holding herself together. The paper lay between them on the desk, a cruel little strip of truth, declaring with certainty what should have brought relief. The child was his. There was no denying that. But instead of closure, it only opened a deeper wound. Because neither of them remembered how or when their lives had ever intertwined in that way. Adrian's chest rose and fell slowly, as if each breath required more strength than the last. His wolf was restless inside him, prowling, pacing, demanding answers that his human mind couldn't provide. Ella's eyes shimmered in the flickering firelight, her lips parting but no words escaping. For long minutes, neither dared to break the silence. At last it was Ella who spoke, her voice no more than a whisper, fragile but cutting through the heavy air. "Adrian," she said softly, her gaze locked on the dancing flames, "what if something was taken from us? What if our memories aren't our own?" The words struck him like a blade. He looked up sharply, his dark eyes narrowing, searching her face for meaning. His instincts as Alpha had always been sharp, honed to cut through deception and lies. But this suggestion, was unlike anything he had ever faced. His mind, usually so precise in battle and strategy, now felt like a foggy mirror. "You mean," he said slowly, his tone laced with both disbelief and dawning dread, "someone tampered with our memories?" Ella nodded, her throat tightening. "Yes, I don't know how, but something tells me. When I disappeared 3 years ago, it wasn't just me who was lost. I think you were there too." Her words lit a fire in his chest. Adrian's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. The idea of lost time, of stolen pieces of himself, angered him more than any physical wound ever could. He pushed away from his chair abruptly, the legs scraping against the wooden floor, and began to pace the length of the study like a caged beast. At last, he stopped, turning to face her, his voice low but burning with resolve. "Then we find out who did it. We dig until the truth comes out. No matter how deep the rot goes, we'll drag it into the light." Ella held his gaze, her heart racing with both fear and determination. For the first time in years, she felt less like a victim of fate and more like a warrior beside him. The investigation began quietly. Adrian called Matt into confidence, summoning him late at night under the pretense of pack business. In the privacy of his study, he revealed the unthinkable. Matt's eyes widened, disbelief flickering across his features, but his loyalty to his alpha left no room for doubt. Without question, he set to work, scouring the Ironfang library for anything tied to spells, enchantments, or erased memory. Meanwhile, Ella spent hours poring through her meager collection of keepsakes, letters, trinkets, scraps of clothing, searching for anything that might unlock a fragment of recognition. Sometimes she would pause, staring at an old ribbon or a faded piece of fabric, feeling the ghost of a memory brushing against her consciousness before vanishing like smoke. Margaret, though shaken by Vanessa's strange behavior, offered her own aid. She was older, wiser, and her knowledge of the old pack's history often stretched where others failed. Though her heart was weary, she carried guilt for having once introduced Vanessa into their lives, and perhaps this was her chance at redemption. The nights were long, the hours relentless. Candlelight burned deep into the night as parchment and books piled across tables. The scratch of pen against paper, the rustle of pages, and the occasional frustrated sigh became the soundtrack of their search. Then, one night, while sorting through brittle parchment bound in cracked leather, Ella froze. Her eyes widened, her finger tracing over a word that sent a chill down her spine. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice trembling. He was across the table, his head bent over another text, but at the tone in her voice, he looked up immediately. Ella turned the book toward him, her hands shaking. A name leapt from the page like a venomous serpent, Memory Blight. The description beneath was worse than either of them could have imagined. Rituals capable of erasing entire months, even years, from a person's mind. It wasn't just a theory. It was detailed, deliberate, with steps outlining the cruelty of its design. The spell required a focus, objects tied to the victims, a lock of hair, a personal belonging. A picture. Ella's lips trembled as she spoke, her voice breaking. "Adrian, I think Vanessa did this to us." His head snapped up, eyes narrowing sharply. "Say that again." Ella pushed the book toward him, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "She used dark magic. She stole what we had. Whatever happened between us, whatever life we lived together, it was taken." Adrian stared at the pages, fury simmering in his chest like molten iron. His memories of Vanessa were already strained, their relationship little more than a hollow arrangement orchestrated by his father. But now? Now, to think she had wormed her way into his life by erasing the very bond he had with Ella. His wolf growled inside him, furious and wounded. His fists slammed onto the table, the sound echoing through the study. "She'll pay for this. Every second she stole, every breath she made you take alone, every memory ripped from us, she'll pay." Ella's hand covered his, soft but firm. Her eyes glistened, her voice breaking with emotion. And now she wants to steal our child, too. The silence that followed was suffocating. Only the crackle of the fire broke the stillness, but their hearts pounded loud enough to drown it out. Piece by piece, the truth emerged. The fragments of memory began to stitch themselves together. 3 years ago, Ella had vanished from Stormbane's outskirt villages. No one knew where she had gone. Whispers had spread of foul play, but no answers ever surfaced. At the same time, Adrian had withdrawn from public life, claiming he needed solitude. Few questioned their Alpha-to-be, believing he sought clarity before stepping fully into his role. But the truth was far different. Adrian remembered, now in broken flashes, his cabin in the forest, the smell of pine and earth, the solitude he had once cherished. And then, her. He had found her wandering near the woods, disoriented, her eyes vacant, her memory fractured like shattered glass. He had not recognized her at first, but something in him, something primal, refused to leave her there. He brought her into his cabin, tended her wounds, and kept her safe. And in time, her laughter filled the rooms. Her voice soothed the silence he had once clung to. Her presence shifted something deep inside him, something he had never thought he could feel. They had fallen for each other, slowly, fiercely, inevitably. Two souls stitched together not by design but by fate, until Vanessa discovered them. Driven by jealousy, she had performed a ritual so vile it severed their memories entirely. One night their world was warm, full of promise. The next, it was gone. Ella awoke confused and alone, her belly already swelling with life, stumbling back into the care of her aunt. Adrian returned to the pack with a hollow heart and no explanation for the emptiness he carried. Now, with the truth unveiled, Adrian's lips curled into a bitter snarl. His voice was sharp as steel. "She stole our life, Ella. She stole us." Ella's hands cradled her belly protectively, tears spilling down her cheeks. And now she wants to steal our child, too. But they could not confront Vanessa immediately. Richard still trusted her, blind to her deceit, believing her to be the perfect Luna his son had foolishly ignored. To accuse her outright would only turn suspicion back on Ella, endangering her further. So Adrian and Ella turned to Margaret. They found her in her private parlor, the room lit by a single lamp. Margaret listened in silence as they recounted what they had uncovered, her hand pressed tightly to her lips, her eyes shimmering with guilt and horror. When they finished, she sat back heavily, her shoulders sagging under the weight of truth. "I knew," she whispered, her voice frail. "I knew there was darkness in her, but I never imagined she would go this far. Richard won't believe it. He still sees the girl he introduced to our son, the girl he thought was worthy. But if you expose her publicly, with evidence no one can deny, even he will have no choice but to face the truth." Adrian's eyes darkened, a storm brewing within them. His voice was low, dangerous. "Then we expose her at the Ironfang Ball." The Ironfang Ball. It was the grandest event of the year, a night when the estate transformed into a palace of gold and glitter. The chandeliers blazed with light, their crystal drops scattering brilliance across velvet drapes and polished marble floors. The air was heavy with the scent of roses, wine, and candle wax. Servants rushed about with silver trays, carrying goblets of red wine and delicate dishes that clinked softly beneath the hum of voices. Members of the pack, visiting dignitaries and wealthy allies of the Ironfang name flooded into the estate, their jewels and silks flashing beneath the light. Conversations buzzed, laughter rang, but beneath it all was a tension. Rumors had already spread about Adrian's unusual attachment to Ella and the unborn child. So when Adrian arrived, Ella at his side, all eyes turned. She was radiant. Her gown shimmered a deep midnight blue, hugging her form before flowing gracefully to the floor. Her belly, round and proud, was impossible to hide. Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd like wildfire, but she held her head high, her chin lifted with quiet defiance. Adrian stood beside her like a sentinel, one hand resting protectively at the small of her back. His gaze swept the crowd with cold authority, daring anyone to challenge her presence. The orchestra struck the first chord, silencing the room, and Adrian led Ella onto the gleaming dance floor. He bent slightly, his lips brushing near her ear. "Ready?" Her lips curved into a trembling smile, determination shining through her fear. "As I'll ever be." Together they moved with practiced grace, their bodies swaying in perfect harmony. His hand held hers firmly, his other pressed against her back, guiding her as though shielding her from the world itself. Their eyes met, and for a moment everything else melted away. The crowd, the whispers, the danger, all of it vanished beneath the pull of their connection. But not for Vanessa. From the edge of the ballroom she watched, her emerald green eyes burning with fury. The sight of Adrian's hand on Ella's, of the undeniable love shimmering in every step of their dance, was unbearable. She gripped the stem of her wineglass so tightly it cracked, shards biting into her skin, red liquid spilling across her hand like blood. This was the night she had chosen, the night she planned to end Ella and her unborn child, forever. And no one, not Adrian, not Margaret, not even fate itself, would keep her from it. Chapter 12. United for the Future. The Ironfang estate gleamed under the soft golden lights of the ballroom chandeliers. Dozens of crystal arms stretched outward, each bearing candles that burned steady and bright, their glow scattering across polished marble floors. The grand hall was alive with movement, a current of silks, polished shoes, and glinting jewels. Nobles mingled with pack members, and allies from surrounding territories leaned close in conversation, their voices low but sharp with curiosity. A string quartet played near the dais, their bows moving with precision, elegant notes floating across the hall like a gentle wind. The melody wrapped around the gathering, guiding the rhythm of the evening as couples moved in graceful circles across the dance floor. The air itself seemed alive, layered with scents that stirred the senses, the sweetness of roses arranged in tall, glittering vases at every table, the rich musk of polished wood, wax, and fine wine, and beneath it all, the faint, wild undertone that marked the shifters of Ironfang. Tonight, harmony seemed to reign, at least on the surface. Ella stood at the center of it all, her hand linked tightly with Adrian's. She felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her, but she refused to shrink away. Her gown flowed like liquid ivory, fabric hugging her form before spilling into delicate folds that whispered against the floor. The swell of her belly was visible now, undeniable, and instead of concealing it, the dress celebrated it. Adrian had insisted on that, his voice firm, his gaze unwavering. "I won't let you hide," he had told her earlier that evening, his thumb brushing tenderly across her cheek. "You are the mother of my heir, the heart of Ironfang's future. Tonight they will see you as I do." And so she stood, radiant and unashamed, the embodiment of defiance and hope. Beside her, Adrian exuded the quiet dominance of an alpha. His suit was sharp, black trimmed with subtle silver threading that caught the light. One hand held hers, the other rested easily against his side, but every muscle spoke of restraint, of a storm held carefully at bay. His presence filled the room, commanding attention without effort. When his voice suddenly rose above the music, it was like the crack of thunder breaking a still sky. A hush swept through the hall. Glasses stilled midair. Conversations cut short. The musicians faltered, bows hanging suspended for a moment, before silence swallowed their melody whole. Adrian stepped onto the small dais at the center of the ballroom, his arm wrapped firmly around Ella's waist as he drew her with him. Together, they climbed the polished steps, standing as one before the gathered hall. His gaze swept across the crowd, sharp, unyielding, the way only an alpha could command the attention of hundreds. I have a toast to make, Adrian declared, his tone deep, resonant, and sure. His words carried effortlessly to the farthest corners of the room. Ella's heart skipped a beat. She had known he planned something, but not the weight of this moment. Her palm dampened in his, her breath quickened. Her eyes flickered toward him, searching his face, and he turned just enough to give her hand a gentle squeeze. His silent reassurance steadied her. "This woman beside me," Adrian continued, his voice firm yet softened by a thread of tenderness, "is not only the one who holds my heart, but the one carrying my heir." The hall stilled even further, the words dropping like stones into still water. Ripples of shock, curiosity, and disbelief coursed through the crowd. For months, rumors, lies, and doubts have been cast around us. Whispers of betrayal, uncertainty of lineage, and shadows of the past have tried to poison what we have. Tonight, I end it all. Gasps and murmurs swelled instantly. Margaret's lips parted in surprise, her hand fluttering near her collarbone. Richard's brows furrowed, deep lines carving across his stern features as he stiffened in his place of honor. And toward the back of the hall, Vanessa's wineglass trembled in her hand, liquid threatening to spill over the rim as her knuckles turned bone white with pressure. Adrian's voice did not falter. His chest rose and fell with conviction, each word cutting clean through the air. 3 years ago, I found Ella in the woods near my cabin. She was lost, with no memory of who she was or where she belonged. I took her in. I fed her, sheltered her. And somewhere in the quiet of those days I fell in love with her. His gaze shifted to Ella then, a softness entering his features that melted her insides. Her cheeks warmed, and her lips parted as if she might speak, but no words formed. She could only look back at him, her chest swelling with emotion. "She was not a stranger to me," Adrian went on. "She was the missing part of me I hadn't realized I was waiting for." Gasps rippled across the room like a breaking tide. All eyes turned to Ella, some with shock, some with suspicion, others with grudging admiration. She flushed, but her spine straightened, refusing to be cowed. Adrian's hand lifted and pressed against the gentle curve of her stomach. His palm spread across the swell of new life, steady and protective. And this child, our child, is the living proof of that love. Not Gray's, not anyone else's, mine. The final word reverberated like a vow, unshakable and absolute. Ella's throat thickened, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. Though his words were spoken for the pack, they pierced directly into her heart. For the first time, their story, the truth of their bond, had been laid bare before the world. The hall erupted in a flurry of whispers. Shocked voices overlapped with murmurs of relief. Some gasped in admiration, others muttered in dissent. Richard stood stiff, his jaw clenched, his eyes unreadable. Margaret's eyes glistened with something close to pride. But in the corner of the room, Vanessa trembled, her face twisted, the mask of composure cracking to reveal the fury burning beneath. Jealousy, hot, poisonous, consuming, blazed in her eyes. Her lips moved almost imperceptibly, whispering syllables with a cadence too strange, too dark, to be mistaken for anything else. A spell. The shadows of the hall stirred in response, thickening like smoke, coiling hungrily as if ready to obey. But before the final syllable could escape her tongue, a blur of motion cut across the room. Matt. Adrian's beta moved with a speed that startled even the keen-eyed guards. One moment Vanessa stood alone, venom dripping from her lips. The next her wrists were seized in an unbreakable grip. Matt's other hand clamped across her mouth, silencing her with the strength of iron. Vanessa bucked and thrashed, her voice muffled, her eyes glowing with unnatural darkness. A hiss escaped her throat, animalistic and wild. The music faltered to nothing. All eyes swiveled toward the commotion. Shocked gasps filled the hall, some stepping back in fear, others craning forward in curiosity. 2 guards rushed forward, but Matt barked a low warning, his voice taut with authority. "Stay back, she's mine." And then, as though on cue, figures emerged from the back of the hall. A group of robed witches, summoned days ago in secret, stepped into the light. Their presence shifted the air itself. A hum of energy spread outward, prickling across skin, raising the hair on arms and necks. They moved in silent precision, circling Vanessa where she struggled under Matt's hold. Their voices rose together, chanting in low, ancient tongues. The words were foreign but carried a resonance that filled the marrow of every listener's bones. Their tones wove together, strands of sound braiding into a net of power. Vanessa's struggles grew wilder. Her muffled screams tore from her throat, guttural and raw, but she could not break free. The witch's chant grew louder, pressing into the air like a heavy weight. Then, with a shriek that tore through the hall, Vanessa convulsed. Darkness spilled from her. Thick, writhing black wisps pouring from her mouth, her eyes, her very skin. The energy clawed and twisted, seeking to hold on, but the witch's net was too strong. The darkness ripped free, unraveling like smoke under sunlight, until at last it vanished into nothingness. When it was over, Vanessa collapsed to the floor, powerless, her body trembling in defeat. The hall stood in silence, awestruck. Then, slowly, a ripple of relief passed through the crowd, voices rising with cautious joy. Adrian's voice rang out, cutting through the noise, commanding and resolute. "Let this be the last night lies and poison walk these halls. Vanessa has deceived us for too long. Her spells tried to destroy not just my bond with Ella, but the future of this pack." No more. A roar of approval erupted, cheers rose, voices uniting in loyalty and triumph. Margaret pressed a hand to her chest, relief and pride mingling in her expression. Richard, looking shaken to his core, moved a few hesitant steps toward Adrian and Ella, his lips pressed into a thin line. Vanessa was dragged from the hall, her curses and cries echoing down the corridors until they faded into silence. The witches dispersed as quietly as they had come, their presence lingering only as a faint pressure in the air. And then, the orchestra resumed. Slowly, as if shaking off a bad dream, the ball carried on. But this time, the air was lighter. Laughter rang brighter, conversation flowed freer. The heavy cloud that had loomed over the Ironfang estate was gone. Later that night, as guests departed and the grand hall emptied, Richard approached Ella. His steps were hesitant, almost heavy, and his usually stern expression softened with something unfamiliar. Humility. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice low, gravelly. "I doubted you. I doubted your place here. And in doing so, I wronged you. I wronged my son." Ella blinked, startled by the honesty in his words. Adrian stiffened at her side, his hand instinctively tightening at her waist, but she raised her own hand gently, a silent reassurance. "You only wanted to protect him," she said softly. "I can't fault you for that. But I hope you see now. I would never hurt him. Not him. Not this child." Her hand rested over the swell of her stomach. Richard's gaze followed, his hardened eyes softening just enough for the truth to settle. He gave a slow nod. "Then you have my blessing. Both of you." Margaret, unable to contain herself, stepped forward. Tears welled in her eyes as she pulled Ella into a sudden embrace. Her voice broke against Ella's shoulder. "You've given us more than we deserve. Thank you. Thank you for forgiving us." Ella smiled faintly, hugging her back. When the estate finally fell into silence and only the moonlight spilled through the tall windows, Adrian and Ella retreated to his chambers. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, painting the room in amber glow. Adrian sat close beside her, his hands enveloping hers as though afraid to let go. He studied her face, every line, every curve, as if etching her into memory. "I don't think I'll ever be able to thank you enough," he murmured. Ella tilted her head. "For what?" "For surviving," he whispered, voice rough with emotion. For forgiving, for still being here after everything. His hand slid down, resting over her belly. His thumb brushed against the fabric of her gown, tender, reverent. And for giving me this. Ella's heart swelled, tears shimmering in her eyes. Not from pain this time, but from joy. We're not just surviving anymore, Adrian, she whispered. We're building something, for us, for them. His lips curved into a rare, soft smile. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her lips. Then let's build it strong enough to last generations. Together, wrapped in the glow of the fire and the weight of their bond, they sat in silence. Their hands rested over the gentle curve of life between them. For the first time in a long while, the Ironfang estate was peaceful, and for the first time ever, Ella felt that she truly belonged. Epilogue. A New Dawn. The world outside the hospital was quiet, a silence that seemed almost reverent, as though nature itself was holding its breath for what had just transpired. The night was wrapped in a blanket of silver stillness. Stars glittered high above, sharp and watchful, scattered across the indigo sky like scattered diamonds. The crescent moon hung low, casting a soft pearl glow over Lichen Ridge, painting the trees, rooftops, and empty roads with a sheen that spoke of both endings and beginnings. Inside the maternity ward, however, the silence was broken by hushed voices, soft footsteps echoing down polished hallways, and the faint, sterile scent of antiseptic clinging to the air. Yet beneath it all was something else, something richer, warmer. The air felt alive, brimming with the promise of new life. It had been hours since Ella had gone into labor. Hours of pain, of her body pushing against its limits, of nurses and healers rushing in and out, their voices calm but urgent. Through every contraction, every cry, Adrian had never left her side. The Alpha of Ironfang, the man feared by rivals, respected by allies, sat helpless at her bedside, his calloused hand gripping hers as though by holding on tightly enough he could somehow absorb her pain. His steady hands, trained to wield authority, now trembled as sweat beaded his brow. He had fought battles, stared down rival alphas, endured betrayal and political storms. He had even confronted dark magic and survived. Yet none of it compared to this, the helpless terror of watching the woman he loved fight to bring their child into the world. Every time Ella's cries echoed through the room, his wolf howled within him, primal and restless. He whispered words of encouragement against her temple, stroked damp strands of hair from her face, and breathed through the pain with her, as though each wave crashed against them both. And then, finally, the piercing cries of a newborn filled the air. The sound seemed to slice through everything, fear, exhaustion, uncertainty, replacing it with something pure and breathtaking. Ella sagged back against the pillows, her body trembling, her face damp with sweat, strands of hair clinging stubbornly to her temples. She was pale, exhausted, but radiant, glowing with a light that no weariness could dim. The nurse, carefully, almost reverently, placed a tiny, wriggling bundle into her arms. Ella's breath hitched as she looked down. Small fists flailed weakly, a rosebud mouth opened and closed. Tiny breaths rasped as the newborn protested his sudden arrival into the world. A tuft of dark hair crowned his head, damp against the blanket. He was fragile, impossibly small, and yet in that moment, he felt larger than the entire world. Tears filled Ella's eyes. "He's perfect," she whispered, her voice breaking into something raw, trembling, reverent. Adrian leaned forward, unable to stay still. His breath caught when his gaze landed on the tiny face. His rough hand, one that had once been steady even in the bloodiest of battles, now trembled as he brushed the soft edge of the blanket. The baby's tiny fingers curled instinctively, wrapping around the tip of his father's finger, holding him with surprising strength. Adrian's throat tightened painfully. His chest rose and fell with deep, uneven breaths, And his eyes, those sharp, commanding eyes that could silence a room with one look, misted with emotions he had long kept buried. His jaw flexed as he bent closer, pressing his lips gently against Ella's damp forehead. "He's ours," he murmured hoarsely, his voice so thick with emotion it nearly broke. The door creaked softly. The rest of the family entered, their faces etched with anticipation, relief, and something fragile, hope. Margaret was first. Her hands, usually so composed, flew instantly to her mouth. Tears filled her eyes at the sight of the baby, spilling down her cheeks as though her heart could no longer contain the swell of emotion. Richard lingered just behind her. His posture was stiff, his alpha pride unwilling to crumble completely, but his eyes betrayed him. They softened as they fell on the infant. For once, the iron mask of his authority slipped, revealing vulnerability he rarely let anyone see. Matt was the last to enter. He stopped at the threshold, his tall frame filling the doorway. His usually stoic expression flickered with uncertainty, as though afraid to intrude on something sacred. "Come closer," Ella whispered, her voice tired but warm, beckoning them. They gathered around the bed, the room suddenly smaller, cozier, as though it had pulled them all into the heart of something unshakable. Margaret leaned forward, her trembling fingers brushing over the baby's tiny fist. When the infant's hand closed instinctively around her finger, she gasped softly, fresh tears streaking down her cheeks. Richard cleared his throat. "Strong grip," he muttered, his deep voice gravelly with unshed emotion. A true Ironfang already. He looked away quickly, blinking hard, but not before Ella caught the way his lips trembled with something dangerously close to pride. Adrian and Ella exchanged a glance. It was time. "We've decided on his name," Ella said gently, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "Adrian and I wanted him to carry the name of someone who protected us, who never wavered, even when darkness nearly tore us apart." Her gaze shifted deliberately toward Matt. The beta frowned, confusion flashing across his face. "His name will be Matthew, named after Beta Matthew of Ironfang," Adrian declared firmly, his alpha's voice ringing with pride and finality. "In honor of the man who stood by us when the world tried to break us." Silence blanketed the room. Matt's lips parted, but no sound came. For a long moment, his composure faltered. His throat worked, his jaw clenched as he fought to steady himself. When he finally found his voice, it was hoarse, cracked, raw. "You named him after me?" Ella smiled through her tears. "Yes, because without you, none of this would be possible. You gave us back our future. We'll never forget that." Matt's eyes shimmered. He swallowed hard, struggling for words. "It's an honor I don't deserve, but I'll protect him with my life." "You already have," Adrian said simply, his large hand squeezing Matt's shoulder. The beta bowed his head slightly, a rare gesture of vulnerability, of gratitude, before stepping back, blinking rapidly against the sting in his eyes. The room quieted again, filled only by the newborn's soft coos. Ella shifted, letting Matthew rest against her chest, his tiny hand clutching the fabric of her gown. Her heart swelled as she inhaled his warm, sweet scent, pressing a soft kiss to the crown of his head. Margaret leaned into Richard, whispering something against his shoulder. He grunted, nodding stiffly, but his hand brushed her arm with a gentleness that betrayed the truth. For once, all the old wounds and tension seemed to dissolve, replaced by something stronger, family. As the night deepened, the guests trickled away until the corridors fell into silence once more. Only the soft glow of the hospital lamps and the steady crackle of the fire in the lounge remained. Back in their room, Adrian sat at Ella's side, his arm curled protectively around her as she cradled their son. He studied her face, memorizing every detail, the soft flush of her cheeks, the exhaustion in her eyes, the quiet triumph of her smile. "I don't think I'll ever be able to thank you enough," he murmured, his voice husky with awe. Ella tilted her head toward him, her lips curving faintly. For what? For surviving. For forgiving. For being here after everything. And for giving me this. His hand brushed over their child, resting gently against the blanket. Ella's throat thickened as tears welled again, this time not from pain but joy. We're not just surviving anymore, Adrian, she whispered. We're building something, for us, for him. His lips curved into a rare, soft smile. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers, his voice low and solemn. I love you, Ella Ironfang, and I would love to do this with you, every step of the way. Their hands joined over the small, undeniable swell of life bundled in her arms. In that moment, everything, the battles, betrayals, losses, and pain, faded into the background. For the first time in years, the Ironfangs felt whole. And as dawn crept into the sky, washing the horizon in shades of gold and rose, the legacy of Ironfang was reborn, not with blood or deceit, but with love, unity, and the fragile heartbeat of a child named Matthew, heir of the Ironfang pack. Long live the Alpha. The end. If you enjoyed this audiobook, subscribe to my channel for more interesting audiobooks. Join my channel by becoming a member and have early access to stories and second parts. Save the playlist for more upcoming audiobooks. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Check out new audiobooks in my channel. Do you think Vanessa has been defeated? Comment your answers in the comment section. Thanks for listening. Love, Cauliflower.